Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Yvonne Baldelli. Yvonne Baldelli, born Fold, was born on June 30, 1969, in a small town in sunny Southern California. She was the third and youngest child of Marjorie and James Fold and grew up with her brother Michael and sister Michelle, with whom she developed a particularly close relationship from an early age. When Yvonne was 13, her mother passed away after a long illness. A year later, her father remarried Leland F.A., and the grown children developed a wonderful relationship with their stepmother, who was a kind and caring woman who loved her husband's children as her own. Yvonne received a solid education and explored many career paths, but her main passion was always fashion design, and she dreamed of turning her hobby into a profitable business. However, luck never seemed to be on her side when it came to her personal life. She had been married twice, but both marriages ended in divorce. Additionally, a surgery she underwent as a young woman, followed by complications, left Yvonne unable to have children. After her divorce from her second husband, Kevin Baldelli, in 2007, Yvonne lived alone in her small apartment with her dog, whom she affectionately called Baby. She kept in regular contact with her father and sister, calling them almost every day and trying to see her family at least once a month. In 2009, as Yvonne was preparing to celebrate her 40th birthday, she met a Marine named Brian Brimager. At the time, he was legally married and had a young son with his wife. Despite this, Brian was open about his extramarital affair and shared with Yvonne that he was unhappy in his marriage, claiming that he had not filed for divorce only because he did not want to hurt his child. Yvonne fell in love with this handsome, tanned, healthy man at first sight and believed every word he said. Having experienced the pain of a loveless marriage herself and knowing how difficult it is to leave such a relationship, she did not push her partner, believing that the presence of a child was the main obstacle. However, Brian was not as straightforward and sincere as he seemed. From a young age, his attractive appearance made him very popular with the opposite sex. He was used to juggling several relationships at once and skillfully deceived the women who fell in love with him, promising each of them marriage, a family, and eternal love. It was soon discovered that the married Brian had not only met Yvonne but had also had another mistress. This other woman was Christine Verhoeven, a gorgeous blonde with many connections. She was a White House analyst. When Yvonne learned about another rival, she decided to tackle the situation directly and fight for the man she loved. Summoning her courage, she contacted Brian's wife to reveal that he was cheating on her with two women. This revelation caused a heated debate, forcing Brian to make a difficult decision. In the end, he chose Yvonne, though it's possible she influenced his choice. A few months later, Brian officially divorced his wife and moved in with Yvonne. At that time, he was still in the Marines but had been thinking about leaving his military career. The couple appeared genuinely happy, but Yvonne's family remained skeptical of Brian, questioning the sincerity of his feelings. In the summer of 2011, Brian expressed his desire to make significant changes in his life. He wanted to leave the military, move away from the busy city, and settle on a tropical island. Yvonne felt the same way. She supported him completely and was ready to go wherever he chose. She believed he was the most important person in her life and loved him deeply. By September of that year, they had made their decision. The couple would move to Panama and live on the small island of Carino, which they considered a true paradise. Yvonne told her family about her plans just before leaving, so they didn't have a chance to convince her to change her mind. She sold her apartment, quit her job, and began packing for the trip. Yvonne packed only a few bikinis, shorts, tank tops, and her sewing machine, aiming to start a small boutique where she could create and sell custom outfits for tourists on the new island. In early September, Brian, Yvonne, and her beloved little dog flew to Panama. They spent a few days in the capital before taking a ferry to Carino Island, where they rented a house right by the ocean. The climate was hot and humid, with consistent temperatures year-round, which attracted many tourists, especially those interested in diving and surfing. The island was only 1 square kilometer in size, allowing visitors to walk around it in about an hour. Most of the infrastructure was located along the coast, while the interior consisted of dense jungle and swampy areas filled with venomous snakes, spiders, and other wildlife, making it dangerous to explore. Brian, a talented guitar player since he was young, brought his guitar hoping to start a musical career by performing in local entertainment venues on the island. Within a week of moving, he had contacted with several local bar owners, and one of them offered him a job. He performed in the evenings, entertaining the crowd, but his audience often bought him drinks, which led him to drink heavily almost every day. Yvonne's business was growing very slowly, facing poor sales and making little profit. Nevertheless, she remained determined. She took a job at one of the bars and adopted a second dog she found on the island. Yvonne communicated with her sister, Michelle, almost every day, sharing updates, but her messages became shorter and more gloomy, causing concern for her family. The couple initially enjoyed their first few months on the island, feeling like they were in paradise. Yvonne dreamed that Brian would propose and they would have a romantic wedding by the ocean. However, as time went on, Brian didn't seem eager to get married, and their relationship began to decline. By early December, Michelle noticed that Yvonne had stopped messaging her, which made her worry. Then, on December 14, 2011, Brian unexpectedly called Michelle to ask when he could come by to pick up his SUV, which he had left in her family garage before going to Panama. This call surprised Michelle because it meant that Brian was back in the US and wanted to pick up his car. She wondered where Yvonne was and why she hadn't returned or even contacted her. Brian said he had detailed everything in an email sent a few days ago. He also said that his ex-girlfriend had supposedly messaged Yvonne about the situation. Michelle looked at her messages but found nothing, so she checked her email. She discovered 2 unread messages, one from her younger sister and another from him. In his messages, Brian stated that Yvonne had left him, running away to Costa Rica with a new lover. Another message, purportedly from Yvonne, claimed that she had left Brian after discovering his affair and learning that another woman had given birth to his child. The message ended with her stating that she had met another man and gone to Costa Rica with him. The other woman turned out to be Brian's old friend, Kirsten, with whom he had been involved for a long time and who was pregnant with his child when he and Yvonne flew to Panama. At first glance, everything seemed reasonable, especially since Yvonne was unable to have children. The news that her partner had fathered a child with someone else would have been extremely distressing for her. However, Yvonne was not known for acting impulsively, and she would certainly have called her younger sister to discuss such a major change in her life. Furthermore, the tone of the message purportedly from Yvonne was somewhat strange and unlike her previous communications, which raised further suspicions. When Michelle attempted to determine her younger sister's current whereabouts, she was unable to obtain any concrete information. Calls went unanswered, and incoming messages were brief and discreet, stating things like, "I'm fine, I need time," and "I'm not ready to talk about this." Michelle suggested that Brian file a missing persons report. Brian appeared concerned but insisted that it was unnecessary, asserting that Yvonne was fine, capable of taking care of herself, and would decide when to return home. Although Brian was reluctant to even discuss the matter and hurriedly left after getting the car, a message from Yvonne's phone soon arrived, stating that she planned to return home in January for their father's birthday. This message relieved Michelle, and she decided to wait a few more weeks, hoping that Yvonne would return as stated in the message. By mid-January, not only had Yvonne not returned home, but she had also not called once during that time, and her messages had stopped altogether. Furthermore, Michelle was shocked to learn that Brian had married Kirsten just before New Year's, which seemed very strange since he had broken up with his ex-girlfriend just weeks before the celebration. Worried, Michelle eventually went to the police department and reported her younger sister missing, suspecting that Yvonne had not gone to Costa Rica. An official investigation sent to Panama, the results showed that Yvonne had not left the country. Michelle then asked her cousin, a programmer, to help track down the IP address from which Yvonne had sent the messages, determining their true origin. It turned out that the emails purportedly sent by Yvonne from Costa Rica in December were actually sent from Dana Point, California, where Brian was staying. The same IP address was used for an email sent by Brian himself. As the situation became increasingly alarming, Michelle rushed to inform the police of her discovery. Michelle contacted the FBI and the State Department, sharing her suspicions that Brian had harmed her younger sister in Panama and then continued to send text messages and emails from her phone, pretending to be her for about a month. However, there was not enough solid evidence at the time to arrest him, so law enforcement could only interview him and continue to gather evidence of his guilt. It was revealed that Brian had proposed to Christine while still in Panama with Yvonne. He promised Christine that he would return soon, that they would marry, and that they would raise their daughter together. Furthermore, Christine did not know that Brian had come to the island with Yvonne, as he had told her he was there on business. The family's investigation began 2 months after Yvonne's disappearance, when her sister and niece flew to Panama themselves. There, they sought the help of Don Winter, a former U.S. intelligence officer turned investigator specializing in finding missing U.S. citizens. They shared the story of Yvonne's disappearance and Brian's version of events. After listening to them, Don immediately expressed concern that the possibility of Yvonne being alive was very low. With extensive experience in such investigations and leveraging her connections, Don decided to put pressure on the Panamanian government and publicize the case, turning the disappearance of an American woman into international news. A press conference was held with the participation of Yvonne's family members. Later, Yvonne's father, stepmother, brother, and several other close relatives and friends traveled to Panama to join the search and assist in the investigation. Together, they went to the tropical island of Carino, searched thoroughly, but found no trace of Yvonne. Their search efforts were hampered by dense bushes and swamps filled with wild animals. In addition, the family asked the islanders how well they knew Brian and Yvonne and what they could tell them. It turned out that the couple had been drinking heavily recently and often argued loudly, disregarding those around them. They were seen at the bar almost every day, drinking and arguing violently. Furthermore, people began to notice bruises and scratches on Yvonne's face and body. She hardly ever took off her sunglasses, apparently to hide the bruises under her eyes. The couple's landlord confirmed that neighbors frequently complained about noise, screaming, and swearing coming from their residence. At the same time, FBI agents brought a special team of divers to the island to search for any potential evidence or remains of her. Unfortunately, these searches also yielded no results. Brian was initially the prime suspect in the case, but there was no concrete evidence to charge him. He denied any involvement, repeatedly telling the same story about his ex-partner running off with another man. It was not until September 21, 2012, that Brian was questioned and his home searched. At the time, his wife, Christine, was at work while Brian, unemployed, stayed home with the children and immersed in his beloved game of golf. Initially, he appeared confident, recalling that Yvonne had left him after discovering his child with another woman. However, he became visibly concerned, and the police mentioned that the last messages sent under Yvonne's name came from his area and expressed interest in examining the laptop found on his desk. The confiscated laptop turned out to be Yvonne's, with messages sent from it after she had supposedly fled. A photo of Yvonne with a bruise under her eye was found on the computer, as well as a screenshot of a conversation from November in which Brian and Christine discussed their ongoing affair and the shared custody of their daughter, which is probably how Yvonne learned about them. Furthermore, the laptop search history from November 26, 2011, contained queries such as how to clean blood and how to remove blood from a mattress. These pieces of evidence were important but circumstantial, as no body or mattress with bloodstains was found. The fact that Brian had sent messages impersonating Yvonne did not conclusively prove his guilt. Dawn soon discovered that before leaving Panama, Brian had sold a machete he owned. In an online chat with a potential buyer, he joked that he had only used the weapon once, to finish off a stripper. The prank was so creepy that authorities tracked down the machete's new owner and confiscated the blade for testing, which initially yielded no reliable results. The long-awaited arrest came when police overlooked another crucial detail: Yvonne's bank card. Brian had used the card after she disappeared to add credibility to his story. Before returning to the United States, he decided to take a trip to Costa Rica and used her card multiple times, creating the illusion that she had actually fled to that country. He paid for his ticket in cash and withdrew money from various locations in San Jose, emptying the card before discarding it. Brian had no idea, however, that he had been caught on surveillance cameras at ATMs. In July 2013, a year and a half after Yvonne disappeared, her relatives, along with evidence collected by the police, FBI, and Don Winter, succeeded in getting Brian arrested. He was initially charged with making false statements and obstructing the investigation due to a lack of stronger evidence at that time. At that point, Brian had recently become a father for the second time, as Christine had given birth to a son just a week before his arrest. Authorities attempted to have an honest conversation with Brian, hoping he would confess to the crime and reveal where the body was, but he repeatedly denied any involvement. His lawyer argued that there was no body and no direct evidence linking Brian to Yvonne's disappearance. 2 months after Brian's arrest, investigators made a shocking discovery in the swamp that significantly advanced the case. On Canaro Island, a worker exploring a shortcut accidentally stumbled upon a partially submerged army backpack in the murky underbrush. Out of curiosity, he opened the bag and was horrified to find a human skull inside. He promptly reported the discovery to the police, who arrived to collect the backpack for further examination. Inside, they found dismembered human remains along with the bodies of 2 small dogs. The remains had been cut into pieces, placed in the bag, and hidden in a spot where they were unlikely to be discovered. DNA tests confirmed that the human remains were those of Yvonne, though some body parts were missing. Pathologists revealed that she had suffered severe trauma prior to her death, including a broken nose, cheekbone, and several missing teeth. The presence of the dogs suggested a calculated effort to support the narrative, as it seemed unlikely that Yvonne would abandon her beloved pets, implying that they were also killed and buried alongside her. The chop marks on the victim's bones matched the blade of a machete, confirming that the body had been dismembered with this one. Each machete blade has a unique pattern, similar to a fingerprint. As a result of this evidence, Brian was officially charged with murder, dismemberment, and concealing a crime. In early 2014, Michelle was diagnosed with advanced aggressive cancer. She had been so focused on investigating her younger sister's case that she neglected her own health and put off doctor visits. After 6 months of intensive treatment that didn't work, she chose to spend her remaining time fighting for justice for her sister. In September 2014, doctors informed Michelle that she had only a few weeks to live. Despite her illness, she vowed to continue advocating for her sister until her last moments. She decided to testify in front of Brian, sharing everything she knew and providing all correspondence with Yvonne to the court. She carefully recounted Brian's actions following her sister's disappearance, but then fainted from exhaustion. Michelle died 3 days later. The prosecution contended that on the night of November 26, after another argument with Yvonne over Brian's messages to Christine, Brian, fueled by anger and alcohol, attacked Yvonne and fatally stabbed her. He then dismembered her body in the bathtub with a machete, using the same weapon to kill Yvonne's dogs, and placed their remains in his military backpack. The limbs that couldn't fit in the bag were discarded in the ocean, thrown off a rocky cliff early in the morning, along with a blood-stained mattress. Brian then carried the backpack deep into the island and submerged it in a swamp. For the following weeks, he stayed in the same coastal house, carefully removing any traces of the crime. He told the locals a convincing story about his girlfriend leaving him for another man, which led them to sympathize with him. He even found a new girlfriend, Nicole Powell, who comforted him for a few weeks until he left for the U.S. During the trial, Nicole testified against Brian, accusing him of dishonesty and being cruel. With strong evidence against him, Brian admitted his guilt but argued it was in self-defense, claiming that Yvonne had attacked him first with a knife, which he then used to defend himself. He stated that everything that happened afterward was due to shock, insisting he didn't remember dismembering her body or handling the dogs. However, his internet searches and efforts to destroy evidence showed that he was fully aware of his actions and tried to create a false narrative to explain Yvonne's disappearance. In the spring of 2016, Brian was convicted of manslaughter and received a 26-year prison sentence, with the chance for parole in 2035. His prior service in the Marines was taken into account during sentencing, which helped him avoid a life sentence. Additionally, Brian's wife, Christine Verhoeven, expressed her belief in his innocence and her unwavering support for him. The tragic case of Yvonne Baldelli highlights not only the devastating impact of domestic violence and deceit, but also the tireless pursuit of justice by her family. Despite the initial fog of lies and misdirection, the truth ultimately emerged, revealing a chilling narrative of betrayal and loss. Yvonne's story serves as a poignant reminder of the importance of vigilance and support for those in perilous situations, urging us to seek justice for victims and ensure that their voices are never silenced. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Susan Reinert. Susan Reinert, known to many as Sue, was born in 1943 in the town of Ridgeway, northwestern Pennsylvania. Her parents, William and Jane Gallagher, were a significant influence on her early life. Her father managed a newspaper, while her mother was a dedicated school teacher, which later shaped her path. As a child, Susan demonstrated a clear passion for learning and a natural love for literature, following in her mother's footsteps. She pursued higher education at Grove City College, where she met Kenneth Reinert, a young Air Force enlistee. Their chance encounter blossomed into a romance as they studied together. Susan's determination paid off as she earned her bachelor's degree. After achieving her initial goal, Susan pursued further education, earning a master's degree in English from Pennsylvania State University in 1966. She had married Kenneth in 1965, shortly after graduating from Grove City College, and they began a life filled with adventure as a military couple, moving to various duty stations across the country. Their military life took them to different parts of the country, including Sacramento, California, Rome, New York, and even Puerto Rico, before they eventually settled in the Philadelphia region. However, in 1971, Susan and Kenneth decided to separate, marking the end of their marriage. Despite the divorce, they parted ways amicably, without any legal disputes. As a single mother, Susan focused on creating a warm and loving home for her two children, Karen and Michael. She was a dedicated teacher and a beloved colleague and educator at Chestnut Wald Elementary School, known for her friendly and warm nature. Outside of her professional life, Susan was actively involved in Parents Without Partners, playing a crucial role in the Valley Forge chapter. After her mother's death, Susan found comfort in her connection with the organization Parents Without Partners. Despite facing challenges, she remained strong, relying on the organization for support. As she navigated her grief and a significant inheritance, her life became increasingly complex. However, she seemed to be managing well thanks to her strong ability to cope and a supportive network. On the evening of June 22, 1979, Susan and her 2 children spent what would be their last day together. Earlier that day, her son Michael had spent time with his father Kenneth, a personnel officer at Fidelity Bank. They had played in a father-son softball game, but left early when Susan arrived to pick Michael up around 8:30 p.m. Later that evening, Michael called his father to apologize for leaving the game early. Susan also called her former-in-laws, Florence and John Reinhardt, with whom she remained close despite her divorce. With a full tank of gas, Susan was prepared for the drive to Allentown, Pennsylvania, about an hour north. She planned to attend a Parents Without Partners conference and use the trip as a weekend getaway with her children. Susan had planned a weekend getaway with her 2 children, Karen, 11 years old, and Michael, 10 years old. They were supposed to leave on Saturday morning to attend events, but on Friday evening, around 9 p.m., they unexpectedly departed. The children had been outside collecting hailstones from a summer storm, and shortly after, neighbors heard Susan's car start up and saw it leave the driveway. Susan had been having an affair with William Bradfield, a fellow teacher, which had put a strain on her marriage to Kenneth. Rumors had circulated that Susan and Bradfield might get married. On June 22, 1979, Susan visited her boyfriend before embarking on a trip with her children to Allentown, about 49 miles north. They had planned to spend the night in a motel, but instead of arriving at their destination, Susan and her children vanished. 2 days after Susan Reinert and her children vanished, the community cared for them deeply was overcome with concern and uncertainty. On June 25, 1979, their fears were realized when Susan's orange Plymouth hatchback was found in the Hostin Hotel parking lot in Harrisburg, 87 miles from Allentown and 97 miles from her home. Tragically, her body was discovered in the back of the vehicle. The details of her death were horrific. Susan's body was found nude, battered, and bound in chains, curled up in the wheel well of her car. Her hands were tied, and she had 2 black eyes. It appeared that she had been either beaten with chains or tied so tightly that the chains had caused severe bruising on her back. To make matters worse, she had been given a lethal dose of morphine. The disappearance of her 2 children remained a mystery, however, with no signs of their whereabouts. Police were left searching for answers, with the children seemingly vanished into thin air. The police searched for hours, hoping to find Susan's children with a babysitter, but none of her regular sitters, friends, or family members had seen them that weekend. As a result, the police began investigating to find answers. To gather leads, the police published pictures of the Reinert family in newspapers for weeks. This was before the internet and Amber Alerts existed, making it more challenging to disseminate information quickly. As the investigation continued, it was discovered that Susan Reinert had named William Bradfield, the man she believed she would marry, as the beneficiary of life insurance policies worth $730,000. This revelation raised suspicions that the children might have been killed to allow Bradfield to receive the substantial financial windfall. However, Bradfield had a solid alibi, as he was at the beach in Cape May, New Jersey, during the weekend when Susan was killed and her children disappeared. Several other teachers were with him and could vouch for his whereabouts. The police then shifted their focus to Upper Marin High School, where Susan worked. The school was facing several difficulties and challenges. The principal, J.C. Smith, had been involved in a scandal. He had been fired the previous year, being arrested at a local shopping center, where a search of his Ford Granada revealed loaded handguns, a hooded mask, and various tools associated with burglary. Additionally, a syringe filled with morphine was found in his trunk. Jay's life was already unraveling before his wife's cancer diagnosis. In 1977, his wife was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer, which she would eventually succumb to in August 1979. During her illness, she kept a diary, documenting her husband's increasingly bizarre behavior. Jay had begun engaging in consensual non-monogamous activities, including group sex and partner swapping, to which his wife strongly objected. This behavior seemed to be a precursor to even more alarming actions. Around the same time, their daughter, Stephanie, moved back in with her parents, bringing her husband Edward Hunsberger with her. The family was already dealing with the uncertainty of her mother's cancer battle, and tensions were running high among them. Edward Hunsberger and his wife Stephanie, Jay's daughter and son-in-law, struggled with heroin addiction and had trouble finding steady employment in the years leading up to their move. In an effort to escape their struggles with addiction, they moved back in with Jay family in early 1978. However, just a few months after the move, Stephanie and Edward mysteriously vanished. The last confirmed sighting of they was in February 1978, when they visited Edward's parents in North Wales, Pennsylvania. Before leaving, they mentioned that they would return to visit soon. However, after this point, all contact with them ceased. Edward failed to appear at a scheduled meeting with his probation officer later that month, prompting authorities to begin searching for him and Stephanie. When investigators reached out to Jay for information, he claimed that they had left for California to escape debts owed to local drug dealers. Despite his assertions, Jay was unable to provide any further details about their disappearance. Edward and Stephanie had been constantly on the move, traveling from place to place and never staying in one location for too long, making it easy for them to disappear without anyone noticing. Meanwhile, Jay was arrested for theft, and a search of his home uncovered some disturbing items. Authorities found firearms, marijuana, prescription pills, security guard uniforms and badges, as well as disturbing pornography. They also discovered nitric acid and stolen office equipment from a local school. Jay was linked to a string of recent armed robberies matching his description and attire. While awaiting sentencing for the theft charge, Jay's alibi witness, Bradfield, testified that they were on vacation during the time of the robberies. However, the jury did not find Bradfield's testimony credible. Jay had a notorious reputation at Upper Merion, earning him the nickname, the Prince of Darkness. This was especially relevant in the investigation of Susan's death, which was caused by strangulation or suffocation. The time frame for her death was broad, and when questioned about his whereabouts, Jay couldn't provide a clear answer. The autopsy found that Susan's body had an extremely high amount of morphine, roughly 10 times the amount needed to be fatal, which indicates that her overdose was likely a deliberate act. As the investigation into Susan's death continued, Jay was found guilty of a series of store robberies in the late 1970s. He was sentenced to 2 to 5 years in prison on June 25, 1979. However, even behind bars, Jay remained a key suspect in the investigation into Susan's death. The police began to dig deeper into his past, uncovering a disturbing discovery. Jay's daughter and son-in-law had gone missing in similar circumstances to Susan and her children. There were two main connections between Jay and the disappearances. Firstly, large quantities of morphine had been discovered in Jay's house a few months earlier. Secondly, a plastic comb with Jay's military unit was found in Susan's car. The disappearances of Jay's daughter and son-in-law shared striking similarities with the disappearance of Susan's children. The investigation revealed a shocking series of events that had a lasting impact on the public. However, the most shocking revelation was yet to come. In late July 1979, about a month after Susan's body was discovered near Harrisburg, investigators stumbled upon a potential motive for the crime. In her official documents, Susan referred to Bradfield as her future husband. As the police investigated further, they determined that Susan's death occurred between midnight on Saturday, June 23, 1979, and midnight on Sunday, June 24. Bradfield and his colleagues arrived in Cape Cod at 5 a.m. on Saturday and stayed until Monday afternoon, June 25. However, there was a gap in Bradfield's alibi, as his exact whereabouts during the time of Susan's disappearance were unclear. Investigations also revealed that Susan had withdrawn large sums of money from her accounts, totaling around $25,000. She had told bank employees that she planned to invest the money in high-yielding investments managed by Bradfield, whom she trusted as her future husband. Unbeknownst to Susan, Bradfield was leading a double life, dating multiple women, including a fellow English teacher, with whom he had a secret relationship spanning nearly a decade. Bradfield had promised Susan that he would handle her investments and assured her they would be profitable, providing a way for they to fund their upcoming wedding and move to England. However, investigators found fake stocks and bonds in Susan's home, which were actually forgeries created by Bradfield. He had sold these worthless securities to Susan, using fictional companies to make them appear legitimate. This discovery added a new dimension to the narrative, revealing a significant financial motive. Bradfield was required to testify in a lawsuit in March 1980 but initially refused to answer questions, referring them to his lawyers instead. His lawyers denied any wrongdoing but were open to negotiating a settlement to resolve the matter and distribute Susan's estate, which was worth approximately $7 million. In June 1980, Bradfield testified in a civil trial, downplaying his involvement in the case. He contradicted Susan's claims about their relationship, saying it was not as serious as she had told others. He denied plans to marry Susan later that year, despite her having shared these plans with multiple people. Bradfield also made an unsubstantiated claim that Susan had an affair with Jay Smith, the former principal of her high school, but this accusation was not supported by any evidence. Friends and family members remembered Susan being in a long-term relationship with Bradfield, with no indication of a relationship with Jay Smith, who was actually in prison at the time of the trial. Bradfield failed to explain why Susan had named him the beneficiary of her $1 million estate. Instead, he portrayed Susan as an irresponsible person who frequently got into trouble, and he blamed her for her problems, claiming he was only trying to help her deal with the consequences. As the investigation into the missing $25,000 continued, Susan's brother and ex-husband filed a second lawsuit in June 1980 to claim the $450,000 life insurance policy taken out on Susan's life just before her death. The goal was to use the funds to conduct a private investigation. However, the case took a surprising turn when Bradfield was arrested on February 20, 1981, and charged with 2 counts of theft and 1 count of conspiracy related to the $25,000. Wendy Ziegler, a former student of Bradfield's, was also charged as a co-conspirator in the case. Bradfield was released on bail on February 23, 1981, and was set to go on trial the following month. However, the trial was preempted when the original civil lawsuit was settled out of court. As a result of the settlement, $36,000 from Susan's estate was set aside to cover the costs of further investigations into the disappearance of the children and to contest certain provisions of Susan's will. Bradfield's 5-day trial ended on August 3, 1981, with a guilty verdict for theft. The prosecutor, Edward Weiss, requested that Bradfield's bond be increased from $25,000 to $75,000 due to concerns that the conviction would increase the risk of him fleeing, particularly in light of potential murder charges. Judge Robert A. Wright granted this request. On April 6, 1983, Pennsylvania state troopers arrested Bradfield and charged him with multiple crimes, including 3 counts of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, and obstructing the law. A grand jury found evidence that Bradfield was aware of the plot to kill Susan and her children and had likely participated in these crimes. Although J.C. Smith, a suspected accomplice, was not charged at that time, a confession from a fellow inmate, Proctor Noel, implicated Bradfield. Noel stated that while playing chess with Bradfield in prison, Bradfield revealed his involvement in the murders. Despite the lack of direct physical evidence linking Bradfield to the crimes, prosecutors felt they had a strong case against him. A previous conviction for theft also bolstered their confidence, as did a potential connection to a person who may have disposed of the victims' bodies, which further implicated Bradfield in the murders that occurred in the 1980s. J.C. Smith was forced to testify before a grand jury in 1984, despite invoking his Fifth Amendment right. The questioning was likely related to the disappearance of his daughter, Stephanie, and her husband, Edward Huntsberger. Around the same time, William Bradfield was also called to testify, but the details of his statements were not made public. In April 1985, J.C. Smith was asked to provide handwriting samples that may have been linked to documents written years earlier, possibly outlining a plan to murder Susan Reinert. This led to Jay's arrest on June 25, 1985, exactly 6 years after Susan's body was found. He was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and taken into custody. While Jay awaited trial, a book about the case was published by crime author Joseph Wambaugh in 1984, suggesting that Smith was the killer. The book was later adapted into a TV miniseries, drawing national attention to the case. Despite this, Jay maintained his innocence from prison, filing appeals and claiming that William Bradfield had framed him. In 1989, the court decided to re-examine Jay's case and discovered problems with the prosecution's handling of the case. This led to a new trial in 1990. Jay waived his right to a speedy trial to allow for a thorough investigation. By 1992, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled in Jay's favor, overturning his murder conviction due to issues with the prosecution's conduct. For 20 years, the state did not pursue a new trial against J.C. Smith, allowing him to live the rest of his life without further prosecution. Meanwhile, William Bradfield continuously disregarded court orders and refused to pay the $25,000 he owed to the estate of Susan Reinert. This issue was finally resolved in a settlement in 1996. J.C. Smith went on to file lawsuits against the state and Joseph Wambaugh, claiming defamation and conspiracy. However, both suits were eventually dismissed. On January 16, 1998, William Bradfield, who had been in prison for over a decade, was found unresponsive in his cell and pronounced dead due to cardiac arrest. Kenneth Reinert, the ex-husband of Susan Reinert, passed away in June 2002 without ever knowing what happened to their 2 missing children. J.C. Smith, whose conviction was overturned in 1992, wrote books about the case and remarried in 2002. He died on May 12, 2009, leaving many questions about his involvement in the 1978 disappearance of his daughter and son-in-law, Stephanie and Edward Huntsberger, still unanswered. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of the Roman family. Jean-Claude Roman was born on February 11, 1954 in Laas, France, and grew up in Claques, Jura. He received his baccalaureate in 1971. He began his studies at Lycée du Parc in Lyon but dropped out after 1 semester. He then enrolled in medical school. Florence Cray was born on March 6, 1956. She pursued a medical degree at the University of Lyon, where she met Jean-Claude Roman, a distant cousin of her family. Initially, they didn't have a strong connection and barely spent time together. However, through mutual friends and study sessions, they gradually grew closer. Jean-Claude was attracted to Florence and he made an effort to win her over. In return, Florence considered him an ordinary person, not particularly outstanding. Her ideal partner was someone who combined the typical qualities of a doctor, intelligent, charming, and attractive. After failing her second exam, Florence decided to switch from medicine to pharmacy. Jean-Claude and her friend Luc Ladmiral also supported her decision. The 3 of them maintained the habit of studying, taking exams, and supporting each other for a long time, finally graduating in 1980. Florence and Jean-Claude then married, and 6 years later they welcomed their first daughter, Caroline. 2 years later they had a son, Antoine, after Caroline was born. Florence lived a normal life as a wife and mother, working part-time locally to support her family. Her husband, Jean-Claude Roman, worked for the World Health Organization in Geneva, near their home in France. In late December 1992, Florence was out running errands in Fère, France. Her children, Caroline and Antoine, were at school, and Jean-Claude was at work in Geneva. It was a normal day, with Florence still thinking about their recent Christmas celebrations. While she was out, she met the school principal. They exchanged holiday greetings and began discussing their Christmas experiences. The conversation eventually turned to an incident involving Florence's husband. The principal mentioned that the principal had been demoted due to an affair with a teacher, which led to a school board meeting. Her husband, Jean-Claude, also served on the school board, so the principal wanted to discuss the matter with Jean-Claude, so the principal's secretary tried to find Jean-Claude's contact information in the World Health Organization directory, since Jean-Claude worked there. However, Jean-Claude's name was not found, which the principal found strange. Florence laughed it off, but she was also curious. Florence assured the principal that there must be a good reason why Jean-Claude's name and phone number were not listed, and she promised to raise the matter with Jean-Claude when he got home from work. Jean-Claude and his acquaintances have lost touch. He keeps his professional life private, sharing very little with family and friends. His wife, Florence, believes he is a respected researcher in the medical field, but she knows little about his work, and Florence does not even have his office phone number. If Florence needed to contact him urgently, she would page him, and he would call her back as soon as possible. When friends asked Florence about Jean-Claude's role at the World Health Organization, WHO, she would laugh and admit that she wasn't sure. Sometimes, she would jokingly speculate that he might be a secret spy. In 1992, Florence discovered that the WHO hosted an annual Christmas tree event where staff members could bring their families to decorate a tree together. What surprised her was that Jean-Claude had never mentioned this event to her. Florence was deeply disturbed by the recent events surrounding her husband. First, the school president revealed that her husband was not listed in the WHO directory, despite his claims of working there. Then, she discovered that a significant family event had taken place at his workplace over a decade ago, which he had never mentioned to her. These discoveries likely weighed heavily on Florence's mind. However, during the holiday season, Florence's brother visited the family and noticed a profound sadness surrounding Florence. As the new year, 1993, began, Florence and Jean-Claude spent time together, going shopping. During their outing, Florence insisted that Jean-Claude buy himself a new suit. On January 5th, Jean-Claude withdrew a total of 2,000 francs from 2 different ATMs. He then gave 500 francs to a homeless person he met before going to a gun store. At the gun store, Jean-Claude purchased tear gas canisters, cartridges, a silencer for a .22 caliber rifle, and a stun wand. Jean-Claude returned home, however, on January 11th at 4 a.m., a frantic call was made to the fire brigade, reporting a fire at the house. Garbage collectors on their early morning rounds discovered the house on fire and immediately alerted the fire brigade. The firefighters rushed to the scene and began extinguishing the flames. While they were working, they noticed someone moving in the upstairs bedroom window, indicating that the person was seeking help. Medical personnel were called, and the person, who was Jean-Claude, was rescued from the burning house. After being rescued, Jean-Claude was found unresponsive and in shock. Paramedics immediately attended to him, and he was taken to the hospital, where he eventually fell into a coma. The fire was quickly extinguished, allowing first responders to enter the premises. A family friend, Dr. Luc Ladmiral, was called to the scene and was met with the devastating sight of the charred remains of Antoine, Caroline, and Florence being carried out on stretchers. When a household fire results in fatalities, the police typically launch an investigation to determine the cause of the fire and rule out any potential criminal activity. In this case, due to the significant loss of a prominent doctor's family, law enforcement authorities began an investigation into the tragic fire at the Roman residence. During the examination of Florence's remains, the medical team found evidence of blunt force trauma to the back of her skull, which raised suspicions and sparked an investigation. Further examination revealed that Florence did not die from the fire, but from the blunt force trauma. The examination of the children also yielded a disturbing discovery. Caroline and Antoine did not die in the fire, but were shot hours before the fire started. This new information indicates that the cause of death occurred before the house caught fire. As a result, the police have opened an investigation into the suspicious deaths of Florence and her children. However, Jean-Claude is in a coma and unable to provide any information, so the police have to look for other leads. Florence's home became a crime scene and police began interviewing relatives, acquaintances, and neighbors to find out what had happened to the family. As part of the investigation, police also contacted Luc Ladmiral, the doctor who witnessed the victims being taken from the scene. Luc had no idea what was going on, and Luc had no clue who the Florence family had enemies when asked by the police. Luc still couldn't think of anyone who might want to harm them. However, Luc was asked to come in for questioning again a few days later. During this questioning, the police asked Luc about the family's relationships and any recent events that might have led to the fire. After a thorough questioning, the police still couldn't find any reason to believe that the family had any enemies or that anything unusual had happened before the fire. The investigation then turned to Jean-Claude, and what they discovered was horrifying. Jean-Claude had never actually worked for the World Health Organization, nor had he ever lectured at the University of Dijon. In fact, he wasn't even a qualified doctor. Luc is initially skeptical, but as he thinks back to his time studying with Jean-Claude, he begins to realize that something is wrong. Luc recalls a specific incident from his second year when Jean-Claude was absent from an exam, and Luc visited Jean-Claude at home and found him unwell, with clammy skin, a pale complexion, and dark circles under his eyes. Jean-Claude confided in Luc that he was battling lymphoma, a cancer that had been under control but worsened by the stress of the exam. Luc promised to keep this a secret, especially from Florence, as Jean-Claude had asked him to. The police were unable to obtain any significant information from Luc, so they decided to wait for the results of the forensic tests on the victims. The police noticed several unusual things about the house. All the doors were locked from the inside, indicating that no one had broken in. At first, the main theory was that the fire was an accident. However, the condition of the bodies made them consider other possibilities. The findings pointed to a more complex and sinister scenario, therefore, it was necessary to interrogate Jean-Claude. Since Jean-Claude had been in a coma for several weeks, the police made him their prime suspect and conducted a full investigation during that time. After verifying with the university, it was found that Jean-Claude had spent 12 years studying, passing his first-year exams but failing those in the second year. Since there were no restrictions on re-enrollment, Jean-Claude kept signing up for the second year, attending classes and studying medical texts for over a decade. What was puzzling was that he never managed to pass the second-year exam. Jean-Claude's uncle went to his parents' house to break the tragic news. When Jean-Claude's uncle entered the house, he found the bodies of Jean-Claude's mother and father dead, both shot with the same gun used to kill Antoine and Caroline. An autopsy confirmed that the gun was the same, and the estimated time of death suggested that the murders were related. The situation becomes even more mysterious after the tragedies become public. The police receive an anonymous call from a woman. She is reluctant to get involved in the investigation but has important information to share. She reveals that she had a romantic relationship with Jean-Claude after meeting him in Paris. She was also told that he was a researcher at the World Health Organization. The woman was misled into believing that Jean-Claude was involved in and funding major research projects. He also presented himself as having a significant position in Geneva's banks, making them seem very attractive. Jean-Claude convinced her to invest in a Swiss bank by offering an unusually high 18% interest rate. The woman eventually agreed to give Jean-Claude 990,000 francs to invest, expecting to receive her returns after 3 months. As the deadline approached in early January, she reminded Jean-Claude of their agreement, stressing that she urgently needed the funds to support herself and her family. After negotiating, Jean-Claude invited the woman to dinner with a well-known politician, which sparked her interest in recovering her investment. On the agreed day, Jean-Claude picked her up in Paris, and they began their journey. However, as night fell, they found themselves lost on the road. Jean-Claude suddenly stopped the car and attacked the woman with tear gas, a stun wand, and a cable in an attempt to subdue her. Despite being caught off guard, the woman fought back fiercely and managed to escape the vehicle. Jean-Claude chased after her but stopped when she begged for mercy. After his plan failed, Jean-Claude begged for forgiveness and used a familiar excuse with the woman, claiming that his lymphoma was acting up, causing his erratic behavior. The woman agreed not to talk about the incident. As the police looked into Jean-Claude, they began to see him as a con man and a manipulator. When Jean-Claude awoke from his coma, he was immediately approached by the police, who wanted him to confess, but Jean-Claude chose to remain silent. With a blank expression, he stared into space, reluctant to speak when the police asked him about the events of January 9th, the fire, the shooting of Antoine and Caroline, Florence's serious injuries, and the discovery of his dead parents. Despite repeated questioning, Jean-Claude revealed nothing. The truth about Jean-Claude's life was finally revealed to the police. That's when he decided to break his silence. The reasons for this sudden change are still unclear, but it marked the beginning of him speaking out. On the evening of January 9th, Jean-Claude and his wife Florence spent a typical night at home. After putting their children to bed, they went to their bedroom. However, Jean-Claude's memories of that night are unclear until he recalls a disturbing scene, finding his wife lying in a pool of blood on their bed, with a bloodied rolling pin in his hand. Confused about what had happened, Jean-Claude claims he didn't remember if an argument had occurred. He then went to sleep beside his wife's body. The next morning, he woke up and prepared breakfast for their children, Caroline and Antoine. He served them cereal and joined them to watch TV. When the children asked about their mother, Jean-Claude told them she was unwell and needed to rest. After breakfast, Jean-Claude urged Caroline to go upstairs to her bedroom. Jean-Claude then took out a .22 caliber rifle, equipped with a silencer, and shot his 7-year-old daughter Caroline in the back of the head, killing her. His son Antoine also met a similar tragic end. After the shootings, Jean-Claude left the house and went about his daily routine, appearing normal to those around him. He bought newspapers and watched television at home. However, Jean-Claude received a phone call from his parents inviting him to lunch, which he accepted. Jean-Claude drove to his parents' home and joined them for lunch. After lunch, Jean-Claude asked his father to go upstairs with him, saying Jean-Claude needed help with a faulty boiler pipe. Jean-Claude's elderly father checked the pipe at Jean-Claude's request. However, Jean-Claude shot his father in the back. He then went downstairs to his mother and shot her. Before leaving, Jean-Claude also shot the family dog. During the trial, when questioned about this, Jean-Claude showed a hint of remorse. Overcome with emotion, he broke down in tears, explaining that the dog was cherished by his children and reminded him of Caroline. This moment led Jean-Claude to decide to return home and take his own life. But his plan did not go as intended. Jean-Claude's former lover gave him 990,000 francs for an investment scheme, which he used to support himself. Jean-Claude told many people, including Florence's relatives and family, about the high returns from his investments, and they trusted him because they knew him. Jean-Claude gradually amassed a large sum of money from those who trusted him. To avoid detection by the tax authorities and others, Jean-Claude transferred the money to accounts in his own name in Geneva. Meanwhile, Jean-Claude managed the family finances, keeping his fraudulent activities a secret from Florence. Eventually, the inevitable happened, and it was time for Jean-Claude to face the consequences of his actions. As expected, those who had invested with Jean-Claude began to demand their money back, along with the promised returns. Despite having amassed over 2 million francs, Jean-Claude spent it all as soon as he had it to cover immediate expenses, leaving Jean-Claude with little to no savings. The inevitable day came when Jean-Claude had to confess the truth to Florence and the others who had entrusted him with money. Jean-Claude could no longer maintain the lie he had created. Feeling trapped and overwhelmed, he believes that ending his family's lives is a way to protect them from the consequences of his fraud. Jean-Claude then plans to commit suicide to avoid facing the reality of his situation. On June 23, 1996, Jean-Claude's trial began. Throughout the trial, Jean-Claude remained largely silent, sitting behind a glass partition with police on either side. On July 2, the court delivered its verdict. Jean-Claude was found guilty of murdering his wife, children, and parents. He was given a life sentence with no chance of parole for 22 years. After serving time in prison, Jean-Claude claimed to have become a devout Christian and expressed remorse for his actions. In 2019, Jean-Claude requested to be released from prison to live in a convent, where he could spend the rest of his life in repentance. The judge agreed to Jean-Claude's request. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of the Ortega family. Paula, born in March 1986, is the second child in a large family. She excelled at Dario Figueroa Lara School and then went on to study at the Polytechnic University. During her time at university, Paula discovered her passion for the hospitality industry. After completing her studies, Paula became actively involved in expanding her family's business, focusing on the production of party goods. Her family, the Ortega Alcosers, were wealthy and highly respected in Sangalqui and surrounding towns in Ecuador. Paula's father had started his business by supplying party goods across Ecuador, eventually finding great success and enabling him to produce his own balloons, piñatas, and other festive items. This growth led to the establishment of multiple stores. The business success led to the opening of several stores in various locations, including in Sinoli in Ecuador's capital, Quito. Each member of the family played a vital role in the business, contributing to its development and operation. The father oversaw the expansion of the main production line, while opening new workshops for various party items. Paula and her two siblings each managed a store, shaping it according to their own vision. Paula's entrepreneurial skills extended beyond just managing her store. The business became even more successful when she added a party planning service. This venture brought her immense joy as it allowed her to bring happiness to people. Paula Ortega has achieved great success in her business career, but her personal life has not been as fortunate. Despite her youthful appearance, she faced numerous hardships in her life, with her first marriage to Carlos Pedro serving as an example. After their first daughter was born, Carlos became an alcoholic. This led to him frequently disappearing from home, during which time he also stole money from Paula's shop. Things got worse when Paula discovered Carlos was having an affair, forcing her to end her marriage to him. During this difficult time, raising her daughter alone, Paula found it difficult to be optimistic to find happiness. However, with her family's emotional support and dedication to work, she eventually regained some stability. It wasn't until 10 years later that Paula met Christian Diego, a young man 4 years her junior. She was initially hesitant to trust him due to what had happened before. Christian, however, turned out to be patient, reliable, and especially skilled in forming a connection with Paula's daughter. 2 years into the relationship, Paula's heart softened towards Christian, and they decided to get married. Christian lovingly Paula's daughter as his own, and soon they welcomed their new daughter, Maria. Christian and Paula spent 5 happy years together, during which time Christian became an integral part of Paula's family business, helping to find locations for new stores. This job required him to travel often, resulting in frequent absences from home. Christian comes from a low-income family, but he has big dreams. He wants to one day own a large and successful business. In 2000, when her father passed away after a long illness, her life took a complete turn. The loss devastated the family and disrupted their business. Some people are so skilled at hiding their true nature that they can live with others for years without raising suspicion. A shocking and unexpected incident is often what exposes their true nature. And Christian's change becomes apparent after several incidents, which reveal his true character. Christian and his wife, Paula Ortega, appeared to be a happy and successful couple to those around them. But beneath the surface, their relationship was far from perfect. Christian saw an opportunity to take over Paula's father's role and fulfill his own ambitions of wealth and power. Unfortunately, due to his lack of experience, he made a series of failed business decisions. Frustrated and desperate, Christian's behavior towards his family changed dramatically. He began to resent them, then abandoned them to live a life of luxury. He immersed himself in a world of pleasure and became involved with many women and alcohol. Without Paula's father to restrain him, Christian's true nature finally began to emerge. Paula refuses to repeat the mistakes of her previous miserable marriage, but her relationship with Christian only gets worse. They had an unhappy home life, filled with frequent, that revealed Christian's true character, an ambitious and power-hungry individual who only cared about himself and demanded unconditional obedience. After a heated argument, Paula secretly filed for divorce. However, when Christian found out, his behavior suddenly changed. To maintain his status in the family and afraid of losing everything, Christian repented and tried to change everything. He sincerely apologized for his previous actions, saying that they were due to confusion and insecurity, and vowed to love and cherish his family. Convinced by Christian's words and afraid of being alone again, Paula decided to give him a second chance, despite her initial reservations. In an attempt to mend their relationship, Christian proposed a romantic dinner at home, which Paula agreed to. To prepare for the evening, Paula asked her parents to babysit her daughter. While getting ready, she still couldn't get rid of her mixed feelings. On the surface, she was very excited, but deep inside, she still longed for a happy, united family and durable family. The evening got off to a great start, with the living room decorated with festive garlands and the dining table lit by the warm glow of candles. Christian opened a bottle of white wine, and Paula served a hot meal. However, Christian's sudden announcement disrupted the peaceful atmosphere. He shared with Paula his plans for the Allure company, revealing that he had made a serious mistake in a recent tender, and it has resulted in significant financial losses. Christian announces that the company needs a new investor to stay afloat. This means that a portion of the company's ownership will change officially. Paula objects to the idea, believing that her father's business should remain family-owned. Christian, who has found an investor, becomes increasingly frustrated with Paula's objections. His eagerness to close the deal clashes with Paula's desire to keep the company in the family, causing tension in their relationship and spoiling the mood at dinner. On January 2, 2023, Paula took her youngest daughter to the playroom. She then went to her shop, where she was preparing a large order for an upcoming themed event, which involved assembling balloon fountains and party decorations. During her lunch break, 2 men showed up at the shop, despite it being closed. She opened the door, expecting a courier for the balloon bouquets she had prepared. To her surprise, the two men were dressed alike and wore dark hoodies, which made them stand out from the other customer. As they entered the shop, they seemed out of place and their lingering. Scanning the area caused Paula to feel uneasy. The situation escalated when they moved toward her, cornering her against the wall. Then, a young courier knocked on the glass door, breaking the tense atmosphere. Two suspicious men quickly left the store, and the delivery person accidentally rescued Paula from a dangerous situation. Paula felt a mix of anxiety and apprehension as she handed over the package, then she proceeded to close her shop, wrapping up her day. Her hands trembled as she called her mother, expressing her fear over the phone. Although her mother advised reporting the incident to the police, Paula declined. Maybe she was just scared, and no harm actually happened. The rest of the day, Paula's thoughts were consumed by the strange encounter and her husband Christian's recent behavior. Seeking comfort, she took a walk around the city, stopping at a cafe for coffee and then visiting her sister, where they shared a cup of fragrant tea. As they talked, Paula opened up to her sister about the frightening encounter at her shop and her troubled marriage. She shared how Christian had changed after their father's passing, becoming increasingly consumed by his addiction to alcohol and being unfaithful. For the first time, Paula let go of her pride and shame, confessing to her sister the pain she endured in her marriage. The conversation brought her a sense of relief and comfort. Paula's younger sister Adriana described her as lively, happy, enterprising, and hardworking, with a gentle and kind nature as a mother. One day, Paula discussed her long-term goals with her sister, including her aspirations for her daughter's future careers and her own plans for the business. She was a selfless and dedicated person. After their emotional conversation, Paula headed home. However, her journey was interrupted by a phone call from Christian. He informed her that he was picking up their daughter from her play activities and would also stop by the shop to pick up his other daughter. The background noise of children's voices made his conversation rushed. Paula didn't get an opportunity to tell Christian about a disturbing incident at her shop, largely because she suspected his possible involvement. Paula reluctantly went back to work, putting her family's needs before her own. Christian soon arrived alone, explaining that their daughter had opted to go home early, and he couldn't refuse her request. He told Paula that the girls were waiting for dinner at home and were looking forward to hamburgers. Then, Christian took Paula to the courtyard of a shopping center several blocks away, rather than a nearby fast food joint. After parking the car in a secluded area, he left Paula inside while he went to collect their order. As she relaxed in the passenger seat after a stressful day, Paula closed her eyes, unaware of the danger approaching. Two familiar figures soon appeared near the car, talking loudly and circling the vehicle. Paula recognized them as the unexpected visitors who had been to her shop. She tried to remain calm, trusting that the car was secure and Christian would return soon. However, the car's lights suddenly flashed, and the door locks disengaged. Panicked, Paula scrambled to the back seat, hiding between the seats and covering her head with her arms. Unfortunately, she was trapped with no escape. One of the intruders took the driver's seat, and the other got into the back seat. There, he pinned Paula down, making her situation worse. She then felt a warm liquid flowing down her arm, and shortly after, she lost consciousness. Paula sustained severe injuries, including 11 knife wounds on her neck and 2 on her face. A violent attack left Paula heavily injured and her assailants fled the scene. 7 minutes later, Christian returned to the car and witnessed a horrifying scene. The inside of the car was covered in blood. Panicked, Christian called emergency services and struggled to explain the situation clearly. After notifying Paula's mother about the attack, Christian drove to the hospital, but sadly, Paula died in the emergency room before receiving medical attention. Christian's reaction to his wife's tragic death was one of intense grief. Paula's sudden and violent death left everyone in shock, and many questions remained unanswered about the identity and motives of her attackers. Investigators discovered that $600 and a gold necklace were missing from Paula's purse, so they initially suspected a robbery. Further investigation revealed that two unknown men had visited Paula's store earlier that day, captured on city cameras. Although the footage showed the suspects wearing hoodies, making their faces unidentifiable, but images from the security camera footage still provide some clues for investigators to pursue. 2 months after the tragic incident, Paula's family was still seeking justice, but the investigation had made little progress. However, things changed when Paula's younger sister, Adriana, shared important information that she suspected Kirsten was involved in the case. Adriana told investigators about her conversation with Paula on the day of the incident. Revealing Kirsten's infidelity and domestic violence towards Paula, which led Paula to consider ending her marriage. Kirsten had a motive for the crime, because if the divorce happened, his ambitions would be affected and he would lose his wealth and social status. The prosecution learned about this lead further and conducted a search of Kirsten's home, where they found incriminating messages on his phone. These messages revealed multiple affairs and strained marital relations. Another critical piece of evidence was a document that Paula had refused to sign, which would have transferred the company to other investors. As the prosecution continues to gather evidence against Kirsten, they uncover new details that shed further light on the complexities of Kirsten and Paula's relationship. Notably, 2 weeks after the incident, Adriana discovered a transaction that raised further suspicions about Kirsten's behavior. She discovered that he had made a significant transaction, transferring $2,000 to an unidentified woman's bank account. He made a payment from his wife Paula's account while she was dying from her injuries. It seems Kirsten has been waiting for the right opportunity to do this. Investigations confirmed that on the day of the incident, Kirsten made a $2,000 transfer to Laura Castillo's bank account. Laura, a 28-year-old woman, was questioned by police after her identity was discovered as the recipient of the payment. Laura explained that she had noticed her bank card was missing a couple of days before the transfer but hadn't thought much of it, assuming her brother had borrowed it. Although her account received the payment, Laura denied knowing Kirsten and had a solid alibi for the time of the incident, which cleared her of any involvement. She was released from questioning, but the investigation was left at a dead end once again. Days after the crime, Laura went back to the police station with an update on her brother. As she initially suspected, he had indeed returned her bank card. Laura gave a detailed description of her brother's appearance, which matched one of the criminals caught on surveillance cameras near the car. One crucial piece of evidence was that one attacker had neglected to pull up his hood while fleeing the scene, allowing his face to be seen. The investigation led to the identification of 2 offenders, Byron and Morton Castillo, who had an extensive history of criminal activity. The 2 criminals were arrested, but the question remains, why did these criminals target Paula? A deeper investigation revealed that they had attacked Paula repeatedly. On December 8, 2022, Paula was the victim of a car theft at a gas station. As she was distracted by one man, his accomplice quickly got into her car and drove away. Thankfully, her daughters were not in the vehicle at the time. The gas station's surveillance footage revealed the identities of the perpetrators. Besides, Paula had unknowingly met one of the thieves earlier that day. In a surprising turn of events, Kirsten then came forward claiming that the thieves had contacted him. He arranged a meeting with them, and during this encounter, he managed to retrieve Paula's stolen belongings, including her wallet. This action of Kirsten makes people suspicious of his true intentions and wonder if he is collaborating with the thieves. Surveillance cameras became key in identifying the men involved in the carjacking, and Kirsten realized he was a suspect. To divert the police's suspicion, Kirsten created a new defense story, claiming that he had been blackmailed by Byron and Morton. They demanded a large sum of money from him. However, before he could make this statement, The police acted quickly by questioning Byron and Morton separately and only telling one of them that the other suspect had confessed. The police obtained a confession from Morton. According to Morton's statement, Kirsten had paid them $2,000 over 2 months before to kill his wife, Paula, with the promise of an additional $2,000 after the murder. During a reenactment of the crime, Morton showed how he inflicted 11 fatal knife wounds on the Paula. With the crime exposed, Morton callously revealed all the details about his and Kirsten's arrangement. Morton exposed that the car theft and the attack on Paula's shop were also tactics used by Kirsten to intimidate her. Fortunately, Paula survived for a few hours longer than planned. On November 29, 2023, the 3 suspects, Kirsten, Byron, and Morton, appeared in court. The prosecution presented a detailed account of the incidents on the day of the murder, compiled from multiple sources. Surveillance camera footage from the area where Kirsten parked his car was analyzed using forensic techniques. The footage revealed a disturbing series of incidents. In the video, Kirsten is seen leaving his car and walking towards an elevator in a nearby shopping center. Soon after, Kirsten is seen remotely unlocking his car from a distance, allowing 2 accomplices, Byron and Morton, to enter the vehicle and attack Paula. The prosecutor's report highlighted Kirsten's unusual behavior after the attack. Surveillance videos showed him pacing back and forth, making phone calls, and even approaching and then retreating from the car. When he found his bleeding wife, he displayed no signs of shock or a sense of urgency to get her medical help. According to the videos, during the first 4 minutes after the attack, Kirsten's actions were calm and deliberate. He callously handled financial transactions, paying Byron and Morton for their role in the assault, while Paula lay bleeding in the car. At the time, she was still alive. Paula's family lawyers used this footage as evidence, urging the court to consider it as an aggravating factor in the crime. Kirsten dropped off Byron and Morton near Paula's store before the attack. However, these individuals arrived at the store earlier than expected, suggests that the original murder may have been planned for the store's closing time, when Paula was alone and eating lunch. The sequence of incidents presented in court during Kirsten's trial indicates that the crime was premeditated. Several hours before the 1:30 p.m. attack, Prosecutor Marlon Calderon pointed out inconsistencies in the suspects' actions, highlighting the question of how they knew Paula would be at the store at that time, unless they had been following them. Furthermore, Kirsten's behavior was scrutinized as evidence of his involvement in the crime. Notably, he was observed not fully closing the car window and unlocking the doors near the store. Additionally, he was seen pacing back and forth multiple times before assisting his wife and making phone calls, rather than immediately seeking medical attention at a nearby clinic. These actions are central to the case against him, which accuses him of orchestrating the murder of his wife, Paula. Testimonies from 10 witnesses, including neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, revealed Kirsten's true motives and objectives. He tried to pressure Paula into transferring her shares in the company because he could not sign a legal contract, but his efforts were unsuccessful. Although Kirsten did not physically harm Paula, he inflicted severe psychological abuse on her, artfully concealing it under the guise of a perfect family life. The Prosecutor General's report stated that video evidence implicated Kirsten as the mastermind behind the crimes, leading to his isolation. This measure is not an arrest warrant but a precautionary step to curb his threat to society. After this incident, Kirsten was accused of orchestrating his wife's death. His defense team tried their best to defend that he was innocent. However, they were unsuccessful in refuting key evidence, including surveillance footage and falsified company transfer documents. The defense team then changed their strategy, attempting to depict Kirsten as suffering from a mental disorder. Multiple psychiatrists evaluated Kirsten, but ultimately, he was deemed competent to stand trial. With the gravity of the situation becoming increasingly clear, Kirsten's defense counsel advised him to flee the country. They asked if his passport was ready and suggested that he purchase a ticket to Panama for the next day. However, this plan to evade justice ultimately failed. Christian's search for Central American flight tickets initially raised suspicion with the authorities. Following this discovery, the prosecutor quickly ordered an 8-hour detention of Christian. This was succeeded by the presentation of charges and the disclosure of case details to a specialized domestic violence judge preceding the trial. Christian was held in pre-trial detention as the alleged mastermind behind an extreme act of violence that left 2 young children without a mother and their family to grieve. The Paula Ortega family demands justice for this heinous crime, emphasizing the immense pain and suffering inflicted on their children and the devastating loss they endured. After the case was widely publicized, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, finding Christian and his 2 accomplices, Byron and Morton, committed a brutal, intentional and carefully planned crime. As the trio showed no remorse, Christian and Byron and Morton were ultimately sentenced to 26 years in prison. The municipal authorities of Ruminawi are deeply saddened by the loss of Paula. They expressed their heartfelt condolences to her family and friends. Paula was a highly respected businesswoman, a loving friend, mother, and wife who played a vital role in the development of the canton and bringing prosperity to those around her. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Asel Nogoybaeva. Asel Nogoybaeva was born in 1986 in Tokmak, Kyrgyzstan. After finishing school, she took hairdressing courses and moved to Bishkek to work in a salon. There, she met Azamat Estebesov, who came to her salon for a haircut. They hit it off, and he invited her out for coffee. Asel's family approved of Azamat, who was religious and respectful of Muslim traditions. At 19, she married him, and soon they had a son. However, Azamat's behavior changed, and he became abusive. One evening, while bathing their son, Azamat accidentally poured too much water on him, causing the child to cry. Asel reacted angrily, and Azamat responded by hitting her in the face. Asel left with her son and went to her mother's house. Azamat apologized and begged for forgiveness, promising it would never happen again. However, Asel, who had grown up without a father, was determined to make her marriage work for the sake of her son. She believed Azamat's apology and thought they could move forward. The family returned to Tokmak, and Asel became pregnant with their second child. However, Azamat's abuse continued. One day, while Asel was walking with her son, she ran into some classmates, and after the walk, Azamat struck her again. Asel suffered a devastating blow from her husband Azamat, which caused her to fall and miscarry. This incident triggered a pattern of abuse, with Azamat constantly looking for excuses to beat her. Despite his once kind and attentive nature, Azamat's gaze was now filled with anger and hatred. Asel felt trapped, living under Azamat's total control, and her only solace was her children. Her mother, aware of the situation, eventually took Asel in, but Azamat continued to harass her, begging for forgiveness and promising to change. However, he would return to his abusive ways, and Asel would be forced to endure it. Asel went to the police multiple times, but domestic violence is not punishable by law in Kyrgyzstan, and Azamat would only receive short sentences. The abuse continued for 6 years, with Azamat threatening to kill Asel and her family if she ever filed for divorce. Asel's family finally helped her escape to Italy, where she worked multiple jobs to save money and become financially independent. After 3.5 years, she had enough to buy an apartment and start a business. Although she was relieved to be free from Azamat's abuse, she missed her children and worried about their well-being. When Asel returned to Kyrgyzstan, she was shocked to find her children living in squalid conditions, neglected and uneducated. Azamat had raised them according to traditional Turkic values, forcing them to attend a madrasa instead of school. Asel took her children back, but Azamat continued to harass her, eventually cornering her and raping her in a dark alley. Asel reported the incident to the police, and Azamat was detained. However, his family intervened, pressuring Asel to withdraw her complaint. According to Kyrgyz tradition, it is shameful for she to report her husband's abuse, and Azamat's relatives convinced Asel to retract her statement in exchange for Azamat's relinquishment of parental rights. Asel's ex-husband, Azamat, remained her official father despite his abuse. In fact, the Sakalu District Court dismissed a case against him due to a counter-application and reconciliation. However, after his release, Azamat began harassing and threatening Asel, sending her daily messages saying he would kill her if he caught her. He waited for her at her driveway, work, and followed her everywhere for 3 months. Asel's relatives took turns living with her and her children to protect her, but this didn't save her from Azamat's second violent attack. On January 31, 2023, Asel reported to the police again that Azamat had used force against her, and a criminal case was opened. The suspect was detained, but instead of a 5-year imprisonment, he was given 3 years of probation due to his elderly mother's disability and his 2 children. Asel was devastated and felt driven into a corner with no escape. She didn't believe anyone and didn't listen to Azamat's relatives. Instead, she hired a lawyer and filed an appeal with the CH Regional Court, providing all the threatening messages and voice recordings. However, a series of events constantly postponed the hearing, bringing closer the worst day of Asel's life. Azamat continued to walk freely and make attempts on her life, even sending her a photo of a black backpack with a knife and rope, saying he was ready to meet her. On September 20, 2023, Asel woke up her children, had breakfast with them, and accompanied her eldest son to school. As she was about to leave the house, Azamat suddenly appeared and hit her on the head twice. He then grabbed her throat and started strangling her, causing her to lose consciousness. When Asel regained consciousness, she realized that her son was crying and begging Azamat not to harm him. Azamat threw Asel to the floor, picked her up, and continued to abuse her. He stabbed her face and neck with a clerical knife in cold blood. The next time Asel regained consciousness, she was surrounded by blood and didn't realize what was happening. She had lost a lot of blood and her throat was dry, and all she could do was ask for a drink. Asel's ex-husband, Azamat Estebesov, brought her a bucket containing water mixed with blood, revealing his sinister intentions. He started selecting a knife from the kitchen, preparing to inflict harm. His goal was to reach Asel's heart, implying a deep and fatal wound. Just as he was about to attack, the police burst into the house, responding to a call from a concerned neighbor who had heard Asel's screams and knew about her troubled past with Azamat. This timely intervention saved Asel's life. Azamat resisted the officers, attacking them with a knife. Amidst the chaos, the brutal extent of the attack was unclear, but the apartment was covered in blood. It was later revealed that Azamat had started cutting Asel in the bathroom, then dragged her to the kitchen, severing her nose and ears, inflicting multiple wounds on her face and neck, cutting her throat, and beating her severely. When the district police officers arrived, they quickly called an ambulance, assessing the severity of Asel's injuries. In their search for the removed organs, they were unable to find them. Her ears and nose were shockingly found in the monster's pocket. After finding her, the police took Asel to the 4th City Hospital in Bishkek, but surprisingly, the doctors refused to provide her with first aid, claiming she didn't belong to their hospital based on her regional identity card. Not only did the doctors neglect to treat Asel, but they also failed to stop her bleeding. It wasn't until she was taken to a second hospital that she finally received first aid and the bleeding was stopped. Asel was then transferred to the National Hospital, where she underwent a 9-hour operation. A team of 6 doctors worked meticulously to restore her face, carefully reattaching her severed organs, including her earlobes and nerve nodes, which had been precisely cut off with a special knife. The nose was also completely severed. Asel remained unconscious for a long time after the operation, but miraculously survived. Psychologists warned that her recovery would be a long and perilous journey. She was brutally attacked and left disfigured. The authorities launched a criminal investigation into the incident, resulting in the detention of the suspect, who was sent to a pretrial detention center on September 27, 2023. The suspect, Azamat Estebasov, was initially sentenced to a lesser punishment, but thanks to a presidential decree, his sentence was increased to 8 years of imprisonment. The presidential decree also led to the dismissal of 9 judges, including Kelbek Toto Mamatov from the Soik District Court of the CH region, who had previously released Estebasov under probation supervision. The judges were dismissed due to violations of the Code of Conduct for Judges. The authorities then reopened all previous cases involving Estebasov, with 6 investigators re-examining the evidence. As a result, they found new evidence and brought new charges against him, with a total of 11 articles in the updated indictment. Azamat Estebasov's trial concluded on January 26, 2024. After investigative activities ended in December 2023, Estebasov denied all 11 charges against him and refused to answer the judge's questions, sometimes claiming demonic possession. He also behaved aggressively towards witnesses, leading to a trial postponement. Judge Tulkadir Kulova ultimately sentenced Estebasov to 20 years in prison without parole, plus a fine of 880,000 sums to the state and 2 million sums to his ex-wife. 1 day in pretrial detention counted as 2 in the sentencing. Estebasov appealed, but the sentence remained unchanged. Asel Nogoybaeva, Estebasov's ex-wife, expressed her intention to continue seeking justice, demanding life imprisonment for her former spouse and punishment for those who enabled his actions. She hopes to set an example to prevent other women in Kyrgyzstan from suffering as she and her family have. Asel Nogoybaeva's family and activists are demanding a life sentence for her ex-husband, Azamat, who continued to send threatening texts to Asel even after being imprisoned, warning her that he would find her when he got out. This case has highlighted the powerlessness of women in the face of the law in Kyrgyzstan, and how a loving partner can suddenly turn into a ruthless aggressor. The case has sparked widespread outrage across Kyrgyzstan, prompting Asel's sister, Diana Yellen, to appeal to members of parliament to pass a law on domestic violence. She warned that if they failed to do so, she would hold them accountable for their inaction, emphasizing that one wrong decision could have devastating consequences. Asel's sister also launched a petition calling for Azamat to be sentenced to life in prison without parole. Asel's sister stated that her sister's experiences with domestic abuse were a stark reminder of the dangers of violent partners. She recounted that even after divorcing her husband 5 years ago due to his physical and emotional abuse, he had continued to stalk, beat, and torment her. She asserted that people like Azamat Estebasov posed a significant threat to society and should not be allowed to roam free, describing them as obsessive and dangerous individuals who belonged behind bars. She demanded a life sentence without parole for the person who had already inflicted severe emotional trauma on his victim. She urged everyone to sign the petition, regardless of where the heinous crime had taken place. She emphasized that domestic violence could take many monstrous forms and that it was essential for women worldwide to unite against this issue. She reminded everyone that a person's religious beliefs did not guarantee their moral character. She mentioned that Asel had started a new life, but her new identity had brought her immense pain. Although her physical wounds were slowly healing, recovering her hearing and breathing functions would be a long and arduous process. In a recent interview, Asel had shared the heartbreaking experience of seeing her face for the first time after the tragedy. Asel had said that she wasn't allowed to look at herself in mirrors, so there weren't any in her room. One day, when her doctors were away, she had taken advantage of the situation to go to the first floor to get dressed. As she was removing her bandages, she had caught a glimpse of herself in a metal operating lamp that the on-duty doctor had left behind. Seeing her reflection had shocked her so much that she had lost consciousness. 2 weeks later, Asel's brother decided to let her see her face while dressing her at home. To prepare, He removed all the mirrors in the house, except for one in the bathroom that couldn't be taken down. When he briefly left the room, Asel quickly got up and took a look at herself in the mirror. The shock was too much, and she fainted. She was overcome with hysteria, saying that no one should ever have to see such ugliness. However, Asel still had a long way to go before her face could be fully restored. Before undergoing plastic surgery, she would need multiple operations to rebuild her face, including reconstructing her ears and nose. These surgeries would require extensive preparation, skin grafting, and a recovery period of at least a year. Additionally, Asel had lost 20% of her hearing, which would also need to be corrected. Asel Nogoybaeva, she who was brutally mutilated by her ex-husband, requires a series of complex operations to restore her ears and nose. Unfortunately, these operations cannot be performed in Kyrgyzstan and must be done in a country like Turkey, which requires a significant amount of money. A Turkish plastic surgeon, Miki Sur, offered to perform the surgery for free, covering all costs. However, after examining Asel, he realized that plastic surgery alone would not be enough. She needs a series of operations to restore her organs before the reconstructive surgery can take place. The total cost of the surgeries is estimated to be at least $445,000. Asel's sister, Diana Yellen, is working to raise awareness and funds for the operation, which will take place in Turkey. So far, they have not yet raised even half of the needed $45,000, and there are additional expenses for accommodation, psychological support, rehabilitation, interpretation, medication, and more. Diana Yellen shared heartbreaking photos of her sister Asel, who was brutally attacked by her ex-husband, leaving her face severely disfigured. The doctors did everything they could to save her, but unfortunately, her ears and nose were beyond repair. Diana is outraged and frustrated with the judiciary of Kyrgyzstan, who allowed her sister's attacker to walk free on probation just a year ago. She believes that if the judge had made a stricter decision, Asel's ordeal could have been prevented. To raise awareness about domestic violence against women, Diana is organizing fundraising events to help her sister's recovery and rehabilitation. Asel, who has endured 12 years of abuse, dreams of opening a foundation to support women who have suffered similar traumas. Diana wants to spread a powerful message to women everywhere. Never tolerate abuse and do not expect your abuser to change. Instead, run away and never look back. The true ugliness lies not in Asel's disfigured face, but in the heart of her ex-husband, who committed this heinous act. Diana warns that if they cannot raise sufficient funds to support Asel's recovery, she will be forced to share her sister's graphic photos to shame the authorities into taking action. She appeals to every judge, policeman, and deputy to take a close look at Asel's face and remember the consequences of their inaction. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Chad Dorman. Chad Dorman, a 32-year-old resident of Claremont County, Ohio, was married to 34-year-old Laura. Together, they had a blended family consisting of Laura's 16-year-old teenage daughter, Alexis, from a previous relationship, and their 3 young sons, Hunter, Clayton, and Chase, aged 3, 4, and 7, respectively. The 3 boys were inseparable, shared a love for sports, and were known for their humorous and affectionate nature. Laura was a stay-at-home mom, while Chad worked to provide for the family. They resided in a modest 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in New Richmond, a small town of approximately 2,000 people situated along the Ohio River in Claremont County. Until tragedy struck, they lived an ordinary and unassuming life. On June 15, 2023, Chad returned home from work earlier than usual and decided to take a nap with his family. He invited his wife Laura and their 3 sons to join him in their bedroom, where they all sat together, laughing and chatting. Unbeknownst to Laura, this loving moment was about to turn into a nightmare. After a few minutes, Chad got up and opened the gun safe beside their bed, loaded the Marlin Model HC-22 rifle, and shot his 4-year-old son Hunter twice. Meanwhile, Their daughter Alexis was watching TV in the family room when she heard the gunshot. She rushed to the bedroom and witnessed the horrific scene of her brother being shot as she reached the doorway. Terrified, Alexis turned and ran as fast as she could. Laura, who was with her children, rushed to help her child Hunter. She then yelled at the other kids to flee and save themselves. Alexis saw the oldest boy running out the wrong door towards a field and shouted at him to keep going. Chad followed him, and moments later, he shot his 7-year-old son Clayton. After Clayton fell to the ground, bleeding badly, Chad stood next to him, seemingly triumphant. Alexis witnessed the entire scene, horrified. She then ran into the house, grabbed her youngest brother, and escaped to safety, desperate to protect their lives. Chad chased after Alexis and caught up to her, raising his gun and ordering her to put down the 3-year-old Chase. Alexis wept and begged Chad not to shoot her, pleading with him to stop. Chad attempted to shoot her in the head, but luckily he had just run out of bullets. Alexis fled to the nearby fire station, where she stopped a passing woman and urgently told her that her stepfather had killed her entire family. She then called 911 at 4:15 p.m. She was running down the street, saying her stepfather had killed everyone in her family. She called 911 and explained that she said her stepfather was killing everybody in her house. The 911 operator asked if she could tell how many people had been shot. She replied that she thought it was 2 children. Meanwhile, 3-year-old Chase was reunited with his mother. However, a heated argument erupted between Chad and Laura over custody of Chase. Chad attempted to wrestle Chase away from Laura, but she clung to him desperately, trying to shield him from harm. In a shocking turn of events, Chad bit Laura and then pressed the gun to her thumb, firing it. Severely wounded, Laura released her grip on Chase. Chad then callously shot Chase in the head. Afterwards, he coldly arranged the lifeless bodies of all 3 children in a straight line. Having committed the atrocities, Chad sat calmly on his front porch, feigning nonchalance, while Laura lay inside the house, screaming for help. Following the 911 call, police officers arrived at the scene at 4:25 p.m. When they arrived, they found Chad sitting on his porch, a rifle beside him. The officers promptly apprehended him and put him in handcuffs. Chad displayed a calm demeanor and offered no resistance. While one officer restrained him, another tended to the 3 victims. Despite their efforts, paramedics were unable to save the children, who succumbed to their gunshot wounds. Laura was subsequently rushed to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center to receive treatment for her injuries. Chad Dorman's stepdaughter, Alexis, was fortunate to have escaped the tragic events alive. On June 15, 2023, she managed to flee the house, the same day Chad killed his 3 sons. The police arrested him at 4:27 p.m. When officers apprehended him, he displayed a surprising calmness and politeness, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. Subsequently, he was taken into custody for further questioning and investigation. During the interrogation, Chad Dorman confessed to the police that he had been planning the murders since October 2022. He also revealed to the investigators that he had gone without sleep for 3 to 4 days, overwhelmed by the unbearable thought of killing his own sons. These confessions provided a disturbing insight into his state of mind in the lead-up to the tragic events. The investigation continued, focusing on whether Chad had a history of violent behavior. To this end, investigators examined his phone records, which showed that he had mainly been cited for traffic violations in Claremont County, with one exception, an incident when he was 18 involving criminal damage. Furthermore, they discovered a domestic violence case from 2010 in which Chad was accused of choking his father, Keith Dorman. However, the case was eventually dropped when Keith Dorman failed to appear in court to testify for the prosecution. These records provided valuable insight into Chad's legal history and his past interactions with law enforcement in the county. During the investigation, a neighbor, Richard Van Kanen, shared his observations with a news channel, stating that Chad was consistently angry, yelling at his wife and kids and belittling them. The woman who had called 911 also gave an interview to the news channel, describing how she had been running with her little black lab, screaming for someone to call 911 because her stepfather was shooting everyone in her household. Investigators looked into whether Dorman was experiencing financial difficulties. They discovered that he had bought a converted manufactured home on a 3-acre property in 2016 for $75,000 and had been paying his property taxes up to 2023, suggesting that he wasn't having trouble with his mortgage payments. Detectives also spoke with Keith Dorman, Chad's 59-year-old father. He was in a state of complete shock upon learning what his son had done and couldn't fathom how his child could commit such a heinous act. The father revealed that Chad had been dealing with some personal issue that had become too much for him to handle and that he might have kept many things hidden from him. Keith Dorman tearfully described Chad as a good kid, expressing deep distress over the situation. On June 23, 2023, Chad initially entered a guilty plea and confessed to his crimes during the first court hearing. However, in a surprising turn of events, he later maintained his innocence and pleaded not guilty to the charges against him during the subsequent court hearing on the same day. The judge described the case as an evil horror that was impossible to process and incomprehensible cruelty. The tragic events unfolded when the father, who stood before the court, brutally executed his 3 young sons, aged 3, 4, and 7, in his own home using a rifle. David Gast, chief prosecutor of the municipal court in Claremont County, revealed shocking details about the case, stating that Chad had meticulously planned the events. Chad's son had attempted to escape in a nearby field, but Chad chased, caught, and returned him to the yard, where he was brutally killed along with his brothers. According to Gast, the trauma inflicted by Chad on his family, community, law enforcement, and first responders is unimaginable. The prosecutor emphasized that Chad's admission of guilt in this case has left them grappling with the sheer horror of his actions. He described Chad's killing of his sons as one of the most heinous, craven, and cowardly acts they will ever encounter. The bill of particulars, filed in Claremont County, revealed the full extent of the crime. Gast explained that Chad deliberately lined up the boys and shot them, confirming that Chad himself admitted to planning the killings. When the mother intervened, she was shot in the hand. The prosecutor disclosed that Chad fired 9 shots, causing catastrophic harm, with one boy hit once and the other 2 each shot 4 times. The prosecutor, Mark Talvey, described to the judge the cruel manner in which Chad Dorman murdered his 3 sons, leaving the family and community in shock. Chad confessed to the crime, stating that he had done it and should be taken to jail, expressing regret and acknowledging that he shouldn't have shot them. Talvey emphasized that he would push for the death penalty for Chad Dorman. Initially, Chad faced 21 charges related to the tragic events that occurred on June 15, 2023. Specifically, he was accused of shooting and killing his 3 young children, 4-year-old Hunter, 7-year-old Clayton, and 3-year-old Chase, in an execution-style manner. The grand jury has now indicted Chad on 21 counts, including 9 counts of aggravated murder, 8 counts of kidnapping, and 4 counts of felony assault, which could lead to the death penalty if convicted. Claremont County Municipal Court Judge Jason Nagel ruled that Chad Dorman should be held in the Claremont County Jail and set his bail at a record-breaking $20 million. During a subsequent court hearing, Dorman's lawyer requested that the death penalty be removed from consideration, arguing that Dorman was severely mentally ill when he fatally shot his 3 sons on June 15, 2023. Dorman has since pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity nearly 9 months after the incident. The Claremont County prosecutors allege that Dorman deliberately killed his 3 young sons. Experts will reassess Dorman's mental state at the time of the murders. Dorman's lawyer maintains that executing someone with severe mental illness is cruel and unusual punishment, violating both the Ohio and U.S. constitutions. Those suffering from severe mental illness at the time of the alleged offense are not as morally responsible as others. The prosecution has requested a mental evaluation, and a court date was set for May 3, 2024, to discuss the lawyer's request. Chad's lawyers had agreed to provide a report from a mental health expert by June 3, 2024, to support their claim that he was mentally ill when the crime occurred. During a March 2024 court hearing, Chad's lawyers contended that the Claremont County Sheriff's deputies failed to uphold his Miranda rights following his arrest. The judge has subsequently ruled that Chad Dorman's confession, allegedly given during his interrogation, will be dismissed this Friday. The judge's decision was based on the grounds that the defendant's rights were violated on two separate occasions. Firstly, when police omitted parts of the Miranda warnings, and secondly, when detectives continued questioning Chad Dorman after he requested an attorney. The prosecution called several witnesses, including police officers who responded to the scene, to describe their encounters with Chad. According to prosecutors, almost all of Chad's interactions with the sheriff's deputies and detectives were recorded. The first witness to testify in court was Claremont County Deputy Chad P. Mann, a K-9 handler deputy. Deputy P. Mann stated that he was the first officer to arrive at the scene, and the first thing he noticed was the defendant sitting on the porch near a rifle. After a lengthy court hearing, Judge Richard Fank ruled that the investigators failed to follow proper procedure during Chad's arrest in June 2023, violating his Miranda rights. Chad's lawyers argued that he requested a lawyer at least twice during his 3-hour interrogation, but detectives ignored his requests and continued questioning him. They also claimed that Chad's initial guilty plea was a result of pressure from investigators. The judge's decision stated that the detectives did not fully inform Chad of his rights before the interrogation, making any statements he made during that time inadmissible in future court proceedings. This ruling significantly impacted the trial, limiting the evidence that could be presented against Chad and adding complexity to the legal process, which has heightened public interest in the case. If convicted, Chad faces the death penalty, with his trial set to begin in July. However, this recent ruling may alter the course of the trial. A final court hearing is scheduled for June 14th, just before the anniversary of the incident, and the trial is expected to take place from July 8th to August 2nd, 2024. The motive behind Chad's actions remains unknown. Speculation suggests that he may have been motivated by a belief that his 34-year-old wife was cheating on him, but this is unconfirmed. Earlier, hundreds attended a fundraiser for the victim's family, which the community sees as the least they can do to support them while the boy's father awaits trial for their murders. A memorial service was held on June 26th at First Baptist Church of Glenestee to honor the 3 boys. At the family's request, community members wore bright colors. The community is still grappling with the tragedy of the shootings and the loss of 3 innocent lives. Outpourings of support for the family, friends, classmates, and first responders continue to grow, showing no signs of slowing. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Kirsten Hatfield. A mother put her daughters to bed, but when she went to their room the next morning, one of the girls was missing. The police quickly joined the search, realizing she clearly hadn't left the house of her own accord. Despite uncovering some shocking clues, the search for answers spanned years. Eventually, detectives managed to unravel the truth, and it was truly shocking. Kirsten Hatfield was born on February 12, 1989, in Midwest City, Oklahoma. Kirsten's father left the family right after her birth, leading their mother, Shannon, to move to her parents' house. They helped her raise the child, and when Kirsten turned 2, they moved to their own home. Later, Shannon got married again, and her second daughter, Faith, was born. This marriage also didn't last long, leaving Shannon to raise her daughters alone. Despite her young age, Kirsten helped her mother take care of her younger sister. Thanks to this, she became very independent and got along pretty well with Faith. The girls shared a bedroom while their mother slept in the next one. On the evening of May 13, 1997, when Kirsten was 8 years old and her sister 3, Shannon prepared the girls for sleep. Usually, she reads them a story, but this time, Faith had already fallen asleep, and Kirsten didn't want to wake her. She wished her older daughter a good night and went to her bedroom, leaving the door to the girls' room slightly ajar. She did this every night in case either of the girls woke up and called her. Somewhere around 3 a.m., Shannon was awakened by a noise coming from her daughter's room. Thinking the girls had woken up, she went to their room. However, as soon as she reached the corridor and approached the door to their bedroom, the noise stopped. Assuming the girls had gone back to sleep, she decided not to wake them and was about to return to her room. But before she did, something strange caught her eye. The door to the girls' room was completely closed, although Shannon always left it slightly open. She thought one of the girls might have closed the door, or she herself had forgotten to leave it open. Shannon approached the door, opened it slightly but didn't enter the room, then went back to sleep. The next morning, around 6:30 a.m., Shannon went to wake her children. She entered their bedroom and found that only her younger daughter, Faith, was in bed. She woke Faith up and asked where Kirsten was, but Faith didn't know. Shannon immediately began searching the entire house, but Kirsten was nowhere to be found. She looked outside, then called all of her friends whose Kirsten was friends with. She hoped Kirsten had gone to one of them, but they all said they hadn't seen her. Realizing that Kirsten had disappeared, he told Shannon to call the police and went to their house. So the Shannon called 911, and officers arrived at the scene within a few minutes. Initially, they thought Kirsten might have been hiding somewhere in the house or had gone for a walk. In their quiet town, there had never been a case of a child being abducted from their own bedroom, so the local police had never encountered anything like it. However, soon the officers realized the situation was much more serious. Upon inspecting Kirsten's room, they found the window slightly ajar with a few drops of blood on the frame. The police went outside and began examining the area around the window. A few yards away, they discovered a piece of children's underwear on the ground, stained with blood. The officers asked Shannon to confirm that it belonged to her daughter, and she recognized it. Investigators realized they were likely dealing with a kidnapping, and more officers were immediately called to the scene. When they searched the area behind and around the house, police questioned Kirsten's mother. She recounted waking up at 3 a.m. after hearing a noise. Suddenly, she realized that at that moment, an unknown criminal was likely abducting Kirsten. The search around the house yielded no results, and the police started interviewing all residents in the neighborhood. Unfortunately, none of them saw or heard anything suspicious that night. The only lead detectives could gather was that one of the neighbors was awakened by a dog barking around 3 a.m., coinciding with the time of the abduction. Failing to find any solid leads, investigators turned to a child psychologist to speak with Faith. Despite being only 3 years old, she shared that she had witnessed the abduction. However, she kept repeating only one phrase: "A bad person came and took my sister." This new information once again confirmed that Kirsten did not leave the house willingly, but it provided no further clues to identify the perpetrator or locate Kirsten. Detectives had to restart the investigation practically from scratch. Their initial suspicion leaned towards someone who knew Kirsten well, as it seemed unlikely that a stranger could abduct her from her own room without a sound. Based on the theory, the police uncovered that Kirsten's mother had a history of drug abuse. The detectives explored two possibilities. Either the mother owed money to criminals who abducted her daughter as compensation, or even more disturbingly, the mother voluntarily gave her daughter to the abductors, which would account for the nearly silent kidnapping. They spoke with Shannon, but she denied any involvement. She claimed that she had been rehabilitated from illegal substances for a long time and strongly asserted that she would never give her daughter away. The detectives did not immediately dismiss their suspicions about her, but they were unable to find any evidence that implicated the mother in the case. So, the police decided to seek the public's help, reaching out through the media and asking people to share any information related to the case. In the following days, the police department received hundreds of calls, and detectives diligently followed up on each lead. Most of them were quite superficial and lacked any valuable information. However, investigators soon received an alarming lead. A woman contacted them, expressing her suspicion that her boyfriend was involved in the abduction. She reported that he had been acting aggressively and even threatened her during a heated dispute, claiming that if she didn't comply with his demands, he would subject her to the same fate as Kirsten Hatfield. As the police investigated the suspect further, they discovered a disturbing connection. He knew Shannon's brother, suggesting that Kirsten may have been acquainted with him as well. Additionally, Kirsten, Faith, and their mother resided in a house that was once owned by Shannon's brother, indicating that the suspect might have knowledge of the home's layout. The man's background also raised red flags for the police, as he had a history of drug-related offenses and assault charges. All the evidence suggested that he could be linked to the crime. However, the man claimed he was at a bar that night. Police verified this information, and numerous witnesses confirmed his alibi, placing him at the bar until around 4 a.m., eliminating the possibility of him abducting Kirsten. Following this, investigators pursued hundreds of other leads, but all of them led to dead ends. The case stretched over months, and with each passing day, hope of finding Kirsten alive dwindled. Her mother couldn't just wait and do nothing, as the police repeatedly hit dead ends. From the early days, she tried everything in her power to locate her daughter. She gave interviews to the local media, distributed flyers, and even personally investigated various suspects in her quest for the truth. Shannon faced numerous challenges. For instance, she came up with the idea of reaching out to local businesses in the county, asking them to put flyers about Kirsten in their offices, stores, and establishments. To her surprise, many refused, citing it contradicted company policies. She also attempted to secure a meeting with the state governor, but it was unsuccessful. Shannon also organized a small center with the goal of attracting volunteers to Kirsten's case. They mainly focused on distributing flyers and engaging with the media, but Shannon encountered new problems. Some volunteers stole money, others lied about the work done, and used the media to draw attention to themselves. Despite all of this, she never gave up trying to unravel the truth for many years. Shannon, noticing the fruitless search, changed course. She got a criminology degree and became an officer to find Kirsten's kidnapper and shield others from dangerous ex-cons. Convinced the culprit had priors, she meticulously studied local violent offenders for ties to the abduction, but to no avail. At some point, Shannon resigned herself to the likelihood that Kirsten was probably no longer alive, and she would never be able to bring her back. Nevertheless, she never abandoned her quest for answers completely. The police occasionally reopened the case, examining new leads, but it yielded no results. In collaboration with the FBI, they even created a sketch of what Kirsten might look like. Years after the abduction, no one believed she was still alive. Yet, without her remains, they couldn't declare this with absolute certainty. The stagnation in the case lasted for many years until an unexpected turn of events in 2014. A woman called the police with a rather bizarre story. Her grandmother had recently passed away, and as she sorted through the remaining belongings, she found a diary. In it, the grandmother detailed how her own son had confessed to killing Kirsten Hatfield. The narrative contained such a wealth of details that detectives had no doubt about the authenticity of the information. According to the diary, the man abducted Kirsten from her bedroom and took her to a nearby town where he owned a house. There, he subjected her to heinous acts and brutally murdered her. The description of the entire process spanned several pages, leaving even seasoned investigators horrified. Furthermore, the diary mentioned that the entire progress was recorded on video cassette. Detectives immediately brought in him for questioning. While they anticipated him denying everything, his words surprised them even more. He claimed no involvement in the crime, but knew who committed it because Kirsten was killed in his ex-girlfriend's house. This perplexed the police, prompting them to ask the man for the address of this house. Detectives swiftly obtained a warrant and sent in a team to thoroughly examine the property. Their first step involved spraying luminol, a substance that emits a glow upon contact with even the tiniest traces of blood, even if it had been cleaned from the scene of the crime. When the forensic experts did this, they were met with genuine shock. One of them later stated that the entire house lit up like a Christmas tree. The chemical revealed that blood was practically everywhere, and most importantly, the blood stain patterns matched the gruesome details of the murder described in the diary. Experts removed floorboards, cut out sections of wallpaper, and sent everything to the lab. They also assembled a team for excavations on the property, hoping to find Kirsten's body. In addition, the police found a box in the house containing hundreds of video cassettes, prompting them to recall the diary. They knew that one of these tapes should contain footage of the victim being abused. Detectives meticulously reviewed each tape, a process that took countless hours. However, none of the cassettes contained anything relating to the murder. The excavations also yielded no results. There were no remains or any evidence in the soil on the property. But then the detectives faced the most unexpected twist. Experts analyzing the remains of the bloodstains in the house concluded that the blood belonged to an animal, not a human. This came as an absolute shock to the police, as they were convinced they were finally on the verge of solving Kirsten's case. Instead, investigators faced yet another false lead. What this was exactly remains unknown. Perhaps someone decided to play a cruel joke on the police, or the diary was penned by an individual with mental health issues who saw information about Kirsten's abduction on the news and believed in a narrative born in their mind. Nevertheless, detectives continued to hope that sooner or later they would uncover the truth. However, no new leads emerged, and the case once again came to a standstill. In the summer of 2015, Kirsten's case was handed over to a new detective named Daryl Miller, who decided to initiate a fresh investigation. He studied all the existing documents and records, and at some point, he noticed something peculiar. To his surprise, Miller realized that over all these years, his predecessors hadn't examined the crucial pieces of evidence: the blood on the windowsill in the victim's room and on her underwear. Although these pieces of evidence were stored in the warehouse, for some inexplicable reason, they hadn't been sent to the lab for analysis. Perhaps back then, the police thought the blood belonged to Kirsten, and analyzing it wouldn't yield any results. Miller decided to rectify this and sent the evidence to the lab. Soon they called him back, stating that both blood samples belonged not to Kirsten, but to an unknown male. This was a long-awaited breakthrough, but the detective faced a new challenge. The abductor's DNA sample was immediately uploaded to the FBI database, but there was no match. This could mean that he hadn't committed serious crimes, or it happened before the database's creation. Nevertheless, Miller was undeterred. He decided to collect DNA samples from all the men involved in the case since the abduction. The police compiled a list, located each person, and sent their DNA to the lab. Surprisingly, every individual willingly provided their samples right away. This discovery led investigators to consider that the murderer might not have been part of the case files. Despite this, Miller patiently awaited the results until he finally received a call from the lab. Experts had completed the analysis of one of the samples and found that it perfectly matched the blood found on the victim's windowsill and underwear. The individual was 56-year-old Anthony Palma, a neighbor of the Hatfield family who lived just across the street from them. Palma was one of the first people the police spoke to on the day of the abduction. Back then, he told them he woke up around 3 a.m. due to his dog barking. Now, with confirmation of his involvement, detectives decided to speak with him again. While DNA evidence was more than sufficient for a conviction in court, investigators hoped to extract a confession. Firstly, it would significantly expedite the trial, and secondly, only he knew where Kirsten's body was, making it nearly impossible to locate her remains without his cooperation. Detectives chose to proceed cautiously. They invited Anthony for questioning, stating it was a routine process. Supposedly, they were re-interviewing everyone, including neighbors, hoping to gather some new information. In reality, they had a specific task: to get him to admit whether he had ever been inside the Hatfield family home. Initially, detectives asked if he remembered anything else from that night. Anthony recounted the same story as 18 years ago. However, this time he added a new detail. He allegedly saw a white car parked in front of Kirsten's house but didn't think much of it. Next, the police inquired about his familiarity with Kirsten and her family. Anthony said he knew them as neighbors but never interacted with Kirsten personally. He added that during those years, he got along well with other neighborhood kids. For instance, they occasionally asked him to fix their bikes or stop by for candy. Subsequently, the police asked if he had ever been inside Kirsten's house. Perhaps Kirsten's mother had asked him for help, or he had visited just to chat. However, Anthony claimed he had never been inside the house while the family lived there. For the detectives, this became a crucial moment for the interrogation. Considering the man's blood was found on the windowsill from the victim's room, they had just caught him in a lie. Thanks to this, in court, he wouldn't be able to claim that the blood got there under different circumstances, like when he visited the neighbors on another day. However, there was a problem. The house where Kirsten lived had previously belonged to Anthony's friend, and he admitted to visiting it during those years. But the blood sample on the windowsill was clearly fresh and couldn't have been left there many years ago. Nevertheless, detectives decided to move on to the main part and informed him that his blood was found in Kirsten's room and on her underwear. Anthony began denying this, repeating that he had never been inside their home. Investigators tried to extract a confession, but he consistently stuck to his denial. Then they opted to change tactics and left the room. Detective Miller entered to speak with Anthony. He brought along a photo of Kirsten, placing it on the table in front of the suspect. Anthony immediately pushed it away and avoided looking at the photo for the rest of the conversation. Miller bombarded him with a barrage of questions, anticipating that Anthony would inadvertently contradict himself, but he steadfastly maintained his innocence. Following this, they obtained a search warrant for his house and thoroughly excavated the entire area, but couldn't find any trace of Kirsten's remains or any other evidence. During the trial, Anthony persisted in denying his involvement, but the results of the DNA analysis spoke for themselves. In court, additional details emerged that police had overlooked during the initial investigation. It turned out Anthony had prior run-ins with the law. Several years before Kirsten's abduction, he had intruded into another girl's bedroom and assaulted her. He had also been imprisoned in the 80s for a weapon-related attack. This further underscored Anthony's status as a dangerous criminal, but for some reason, his past convictions were overlooked in 1997. In late 2017, a jury convicted Anthony of abducting and murdering Kirsten, handing down a life sentence. Despite the guilty verdict, Anthony refused to disclose the location of Kirsten's body throughout the trial, and police believe they may never recover her remains. The challenge stems from Anthony's job with the Park Services, which gave him knowledge of remote areas where he could have buried the body, making it nearly impossible for investigators to find. However, Kirsten's mother never gave up on trying to locate her daughter. She persistently called Anthony and visited him in prison, spending countless hours attempting to elicit information. With each encounter, she felt Anthony was on the verge of revealing the whereabouts of the body, but he never followed through. In early 2019, Anthony was killed by his cellmate, driven by personal animosity stemming from Anthony's crime against a child. As a result, the Kirsten family's sole hope to locate Kirsten's body rests on the chance that hunters or travelers may stumble upon it in remote national parks. In a world where the boundaries between love and horror, between compassion and betrayal, become increasingly blurred, we are confronted with a story that captures global attention. This is the tale of Jenna Oakley, a young woman whose life has descended into a haunting nightmare, entwined with passions, revenge, and sinister secrets. Through the eyes of those who have grappled with the dichotomy of good and evil, faith and betrayal, we delve into a narrative that prompts contemplation about the very essence of the human soul and the values that guide our decisions. Despite efforts by Jenna's legal team to argue for her confinement in a juvenile facility, Judge Darren Peckler decreed that she should face the consequences of her actions in an adult prison. As the verdict was delivered, the judge condemned the cruelty and senselessness of the crime against Rhonda, Jenna's stepmother. While Jenna was convicted, her father, Philip Oakley, remained plagued by questions about his daughter's motivations. Dissatisfied with the sentencing, Philip believed Jenna deserved a harsher punishment, lamenting the fact that she would only serve 15 years, while he, her brother, and Rhonda's children would endure a lifetime of pain and loss. But who is Jenna Oakley, and what drove an ordinary girl to commit such a heinous act, becoming enmeshed in a tale of tragedy? Let us delve into the depths of her soul together, seeking to unravel the motives behind her actions and grasp the true essence of this enigmatic personality. Jenna's upbringing was marked by hardship and neglect. Left alone at home from a young age, her mother's inability to provide a stable life left Jenna and her brother David vulnerable. The departure of her older stepsister, who had served as their guardian, further compounded their struggles. The neglect they endured was so severe that intervention by Child Protective Services became necessary, ultimately leading to their removal from their mother's care. In April of 2016, Jenna and David made the pivotal decision to move in with their father and his wife, Rhonda, a woman of 52 years at the time. Rhonda, from the outset, embraced her role as a stepmother wholeheartedly, treating her husband's children as her own. Those close to Rhonda and her husband later recounted how she had longed to be a nurturing presence in her stepchildren's lives, welcoming them into her home with warmth and sincerity. Little did anyone suspect that this seemingly ordinary transition would culminate in a harrowing tragedy. Despite Jenna's academic achievements and the praise she received from her teachers, she grappled with inner turmoil. Her rebellious nature made it challenging for her to adhere to the rules imposed in her new household. However, the situation escalated further when Jenna's parents discovered her relationship with a 20-year-old man named Kenneth, a connection that had roots dating back to Jenna's childhood in Indiana. As Jenna navigated the complexities of her adolescence, one enigmatic figure loomed large in her life: Rhonda, her stepmother. While ostensibly a pillar of support and protection, Rhonda's influence on Jenna's life would ultimately be shrouded in darkness. Delving into Rhonda's story becomes essential to unraveling the mysteries of her personality and understanding the profound impact she had on Jenna's life. Rhonda Raines Oakley, born on March 5, 1964, in Kent, USA, Casey County, emerged into the world as the daughter of Howard Lee Raines and Mabel Walls Raines. Her journey through life saw her graduate from Casey County High School in 1982, embarking on a 3-decade-long career in a renowned company specializing in marketing, packaging, and printing services. Described by her peers as a beacon of kindness and joy, Rhonda's warmth endeared her to many. Prior to her encounter with Philip Oakley, Rhonda had traversed the trials of divorce and motherhood, already a mother of 4 from a previous marriage. Fate intervened when Rhonda and Philip crossed paths on the golf course, igniting a whirlwind romance that led them to tie the knot. Despite their shared affection, the stark age difference between Rhonda and Philip raised eyebrows, prompting familial objections. Concerned about Jenna's involvement with Kenneth, who was 5 years her senior, Philip and Rhonda embarked on a mission to quell their daughter's infatuation. Rules were imposed, including the confiscation of Jenna's electronic devices and stern demands for compliance. However, Jenna's defiance only intensified. Her clandestine rendezvous with Kenneth fueling a growing animosity towards her parents. On the fateful afternoon of September 1st, 2016, as the golden hues of dusk began to descend, a grim discovery unfolded within the Oakley household. David, Jenna's younger brother, returned home from school, unaware of the tragedy that awaited him. As he stepped through the threshold and into the familiar confines of their home, an eerie silence hung heavy in the air, punctuated only by the distant barking of their family pets echoing from the basement below. Curiosity mingled with apprehension. David ventured into the basement, where the source of the canine distress awaited. What he encountered in that dimly lit space would haunt him forever. There, sprawled upon the cold concrete floor, lay Rhonda, his stepmother, her form unnaturally still, an aura of foreboding enveloping her motionless figure. Shock and panic gripped David's heart as he rushed outside, his frantic footsteps echoing through the quiet suburban streets. With trembling hands, he sought aid from their neighbors, his voice a desperate plea for help in the face of unspeakable horror. Emergency services descended upon the scene, their presence a beacon of hope in the darkness that had descended upon the Oakley household. Yet, despite their valiant efforts, Rhonda's fate had been sealed in bloodshed. The grim reality of her demise painted a chilling picture of brutality, her life extinguished by the cruel hand of violence. As investigators delved into the heart of the matter, the sinister truth began to unfurl like a macabre tapestry. What initially appeared as a botched robbery soon revealed itself to be a tangled web of deceit and betrayal. Amidst the chaos of the crime scene, the absence of Rhonda's car and the ominous discovery of a discarded cleaver hinted at a calculated act of malice, orchestrated with chilling precision. Upon Philip's return home, he was immediately met with the piercing scrutiny of detectives, their questions probing the depths of his shattered reality. With a heavy heart, he recounted the events of that fateful day. Each word a painful reminder of the chaos that had unfolded within the sanctity of their home. As he spoke, a gnawing sense of dread gripped him, tendrils of uncertainty weaving their way into his consciousness. The realization that his daughter, Jenna, had been conspicuously absent from the fabric of their lives on that tragic day only served to deepen the shadow of suspicion that loomed over their fractured existence. In the midst of his interrogation, Philip found himself grappling with the weight of unanswered questions, each more ominous than the last. Did Jenna's inexplicable absence herald a darker truth, a sinister plot veiled beneath layers of deceit? The very thought sent shivers down his spine, a stark reminder of the fragility of their fractured reality. With a heavy heart and trembling voice, Philip disclosed the tumultuous relationship between Jenna and Kenneth, a young man whose presence had cast a pall over their once tranquil home. He recounted his desperate attempts to intervene, to shield his daughter from the perils of forbidden love, each plea falling upon deaf ears. Yet, even amidst the chaos of his shattered existence, Philip clung to the fragile hope that his daughter's innocence remained untainted, that beneath the veneer of suspicion lay a truth yet to be revealed. And so, with bated breath and weary resolve, he entrusted the weight of his fears to the vigilant gaze of law enforcement, their pursuit of justice a beacon of hope amidst the darkness that threatened to consume them all. Evidence pieced together by investigators revealed a chilling sequence of events leading up to the tragic incident. At 3 a.m. on August 31st, the day preceding the harrowing event, Kenneth embarked on a journey from Indiana to Lexington, Kentucky, his destination set firmly on the Oakley residence. Surveillance footage from a Denver store manager corroborated this, capturing Jenna and Kenneth's presence on September 1st. The footage depicted them entering the establishment and subsequently departing, seemingly in the direction of a vehicle resembling Rhonda's stolen car. Jenna's demeanor in the footage was unsettlingly composed, devoid of any outward signs of duress. This revelation prompted investigators to pivot their focus away from the notion of a forcible abduction, instead entertaining the unsettling possibility of Jenna's direct involvement in her stepmother's demise. Subsequent searches of Jenna's personal effects unearthed a chilling narrative within the pages of her diary, a narrative dripping with venomous hatred and a chilling resolve. In its pages, Jenna's innermost thoughts and desires were laid bare, revealing a festering resentment toward her family and a steadfast devotion to Kenneth, despite her earlier assurances of compliance with her parents' wishes. With meticulous detail, Jenna outlined her sinister plan to obliterate her family unit, driven by an obsessive desire to preserve her forbidden love at any cost. Her father was slated as the first victim, the designated hour of his demise meticulously plotted between 4 and 5 a.m. Armed with a knife, Jenna intended to lure him to the basement before delivering the fatal blow. Rhonda, her stepmother, was next in line, her fate sealed within the confines of Jenna's twisted imagination. Between 6 and 8 a.m., Jenna planned to invade Rhonda's sanctuary, silencing her forever with the same instrument of death wielded against her father. David, Jenna's unsuspecting brother, occupied the final slot in her macabre symphony of destruction. In the somber confines of his own room, he would meet his untimely end, victim to the machinations of a sister consumed by darkness. As Philip grappled with the horrifying reality laid bare in Jenna's diary, the weight of his daughter's malevolence bore down upon him, shattering the fragile facade of familial harmony beyond repair. In Jenna's meticulously orchestrated plan, he found himself confronted with the unthinkable, the knowledge that his daughter was capable of unspeakable atrocities, her innocence forever lost to the abyss of her own twisted desires. At the onset of the investigation, a damning piece of evidence emerged, thrusting Jenna into the unforgiving glare of suspicion. Philip wasted no time in providing the authorities with Kenneth's contact details, a crucial step in the relentless pursuit of justice. With unwavering determination, law enforcement agencies swiftly tracked the fugitives to their hideout, culminating in a dramatic showdown on September 4th, just 3 days after the heinous crime had been perpetrated. In the quiet streets of Tucumcari, New Mexico, authorities closed in on their quarry, discovering Rhonda's stolen car parked ominously near the hotel where Jenna and Kenneth sought refuge. With precision and resolve, officers apprehended the pair, swiftly escorting them to separate vehicles, bound for a detention facility in New Mexico pending extradition. As the investigation intensified, authorities scoured the confines of the vehicle in search of the weapon wielded in Rhonda's brutal attack. Yet their efforts yielded nothing but frustration. Meanwhile, Kenneth, in a desperate bid to shield Jenna from the full weight of culpability, penned a chilling missive before attempting to end his own life. The ghastly tableau of his self-inflicted demise sent shockwaves through the detention center, leaving Kenneth teetering on the precipice of mortality. In the wake of this harrowing revelation, authorities made the conscious decision to shield Jenna from the grim reality unfolding within the confines of her co-conspirator's cell. With painstaking care, they orchestrated her return to Kentucky, their intent clear: to spare her the burden of knowledge until such time as she could offer her own testimony. For Jenna, shrouded in the pall of uncertainty, the journey back to her home state would be fraught with trepidation, each passing mile a reminder of the tumultuous path that lay ahead. Jenna's admission to the authorities laid bare the chilling reality of her involvement in the crime, as she recounted the grim sequence of events with a heavy heart. In her confession, she unraveled the haunting narrative of the fateful night, painting a picture of tragic inevitability. According to Jenna's harrowing testimony, the eve of the crime bore witness to Kenneth's clandestine visit to her home, a clandestine rendezvous that would shroud the dawn in darkness and alter the course of countless lives. As the day unfolded, their illicit tryst unfolded against the backdrop of unsuspecting bliss, oblivious to the storm gathering on the horizon. The tranquility of the day was shattered when Rhonda returned home, unwittingly stumbling upon the clandestine affair brewing in the shadows of her own abode. A confrontation ensued, escalating from heated words to the chilling embrace of violence. In a moment of unfathomable rage, Jenna's hands found purchase around Rhonda's throat, a desperate bid for control that would prove futile in the face of her lover's intervention. With a sickening inevitability, Kenneth stepped forward, a dark harbinger of finality as he seized Rhonda in a grip that defied mercy. The room bore witness to the cruel symphony of violence, the echoes of struggle drowned out by the cold steel of a kitchen blade. In the deafening silence that followed, Rhonda lay motionless, her life extinguished by the callous hands of her own kin. In the aftermath of the heinous act, Kenneth's fragile resolve faltered, his stomach lurching in revulsion at the sight of his own depravity. Vomiting into the void, he grappled with the weight of their transgression, a grim testament to the depths of human depravity. When pressed by authorities regarding the whereabouts of the murder weapon, Jenna's response offered little solace, her words a chilling testament to the calculated nature of their flight. With steely resolve, she recounted their hasty disposal of the incriminating evidence, a macabre ritual enacted in the shadow of their impending doom. As Jenna recounted her tale, her lover lingered on the precipice of life and death, his mortal coil tethered to the fleeting tendrils of existence. Yet, fate would not afford him the opportunity to atone for his sins, for the specter of mortality loomed large over his hospital bed. In the cold embrace of October's twilight, Kenneth breathed his last, leaving behind a legacy marred by tragedy and unfulfilled promise. Following the formalities of the court, Jenna found herself facing the weight of justice, her fate entwined with the tendrils of guilt and accusation. The charges levied against her bore testament to the severity of her transgressions, branding her as the architect of her stepmother's demise and a perpetrator of theft. Held without reprieve in the confines of a juvenile detention center, Jenna awaited her trial with a heavy heart, her thoughts haunted by the specter of her own culpability. As the gravity of her situation sank in, her father, once a pillar of familial devotion, turned his back on her, his words a damning indictment of her actions. Gone was the paternal instinct to protect, replaced instead by a grim resolve to see justice served. The news of Kenneth's demise, a grim epilogue to their shared tragedy, was withheld from Jenna until the day of her court hearing. The revelation struck her with the force of a sledgehammer, her world crumbling around her as she grappled with the enormity of her loss. In the hallowed halls of justice, her anguished cries reverberated, a stark reminder of the human cost of her actions. In a bid for clemency, Jenna pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter, her admission a frail echo of remorse in the face of overwhelming guilt. Yet, even as she sought redemption, her father's disillusionment loomed large, his cries for systemic reform falling on deaf ears. For Philip, the scars of his family's tragedy ran deep, a testament to the failings of a system ill-equipped to protect its most vulnerable. As the sentencing hearing drew near, Susan Hooper, a beacon of hope amidst the storm of legal proceedings, sought to unravel the tangled web of Jenna's tumultuous upbringing. In her impassioned plea for leniency, she painted a portrait of a girl besieged by a lifetime of abuse and neglect, a victim of circumstance driven to desperate measures by forces beyond her control. As the gavel fell and Jenna's fate was sealed, the echoes of her turbulent past reverberated through the hallowed halls of justice, a haunting reminder of the fragility of the human spirit in the face of insurmountable odds. Despite Jenna's pristine record devoid of any criminal blemish, the perplexing nature of her drastic actions left many scratching their heads in bewilderment. How could a girl so esteemed by her educators and peers stoop to such depths of desperation without a discernible cause? The absence of her family during the trial only added fuel to the fire of speculation, with Philip's refusal to participate and Jenna's mother's conspicuous absence casting a shadow of doubt over their parental obligations. Delving deeper into Jenna's tumultuous past, Susan unearthed a trail of abandonment and neglect that painted a stark picture of maternal indifference. Drawing from a trove of evidence and records, she pieced together the fractured narrative of Jenna's early years, revealing a childhood marred by the absence of maternal guidance and care. Susan's exhaustive investigation traversed state lines, scouring through the annals of child welfare services and medical archives in Indiana and Kentucky alike. Her efforts culminated in a tapestry of testimonies woven together from the threads of Jenna's past acquaintances and confidants. Among them stood Jenna's older half-sister, a reluctant witness whose recollections shed light on the harrowing reality of their shared upbringing. Recounting years of instability and insecurity, she laid bare the truth of their fractured family dynamic, where safety and solace were but distant dreams. As Susan peeled back the layers of Jenna's past, a chilling portrait emerged of a home haunted by the specter of crime and betrayal. Jenna's tender years were marked by the malevolent presence of her mother's ill-fated romance, a dalliance with an ex-convict that plunged their household into a maelstrom of chaos and fear. From the tender age of 3, Jenna bore witness to a procession of theft and infidelity, her innocence shattered by the tumult of her mother's misguided affections. All of these events unfolded before Jenna and her younger brother. It started with a concerned neighbor's call to Child Protective Services upon discovering rats in Jenna's family home. Beyond the rodent issue, the neighbor expressed worry about the children being left unattended for extended periods. Records from social workers' visits painted a grim picture of Jenna's home life. Jenna's mother's hostility toward social workers hindered their access, but when they finally entered, they were met with appalling conditions. Rotten food, piles of garbage, and rat droppings littered the house. Children were found relieving themselves on the floor amidst the squalor. The kitchen was a breeding ground for mold, with unwashed dishes stacked for months. Insects and rodents roamed freely, posing serious health hazards. Compounding the danger, children had unrestricted access to medicines and other harmful substances. Despite efforts to improve the situation by relocating Jenna and her brother to live with their father in Kentucky, conditions did not ameliorate. In the summer of 2003, the body of 36-year-old Sabrina Payne was found in a field near Tremont, Illinois. Sabrina was a black female who was known to support a drug habit with prostitution. Sabrina had last been seen at her home 2 days before her body was found. The original autopsy failed to determine a cause of death, leaving some of the detectives to believe she overdosed. One detective, however, felt uneasy about that assumption. His suspicions were confirmed as more bodies were found in Peoria and Tazewell counties over the next year. On February 5, 2004, the body of 36-year-old Barbara Williams was found in a ditch near Edwards, Illinois. She was found partially clothed and lying face down in the snow. She had been seen alive between 9 and 10 p.m. the night before. An autopsy showed that she had multiple contusions and abrasions on her body. Toxicology showed that she had fatal levels of cocaine in her blood. At this point, police were not ready to call this a murder or entertain the idea of a serial killer preying on black drug-addicted prostitutes. In October of 2004, 32-year-old Shakonda Thomas was reported missing. She had last been seen by her family in August. Shakonda was known to disappear at times, but when she didn't come back after several weeks, her family reported her missing. Shirley Ann Trapp was also reported missing in the late summer of 2004. She was seen 3 days before she was reported missing. Tamara Walsh was reported missing in September of 2004 after not being seen for 3 weeks. All 3 missing women were also black females known to support a crack cocaine habit with prostitution. 36-year-old mother of 8, Laura Lawler, disappeared from her home after leaving with a man and woman. Her longtime partner searched for her but only was able to determine she had been with a man named Larry. Her boyfriend, and father to her 7 daughters and 1 son, describes Laura as the love of his life and a beautiful soul. The two had experimented with crack cocaine, and Laura seemed to struggle with addiction before her disappearance. On September 25, 2004, Linda Neal was found on King Road in Tazewell County. She was found nude on the side of the road. Linda, like the other women, was known to be part of the drug scene in Peoria. At this point, police had determined there was likely a serial killer stalking black females in the Peoria area. A task force was formed, which one detective states would have occurred much quicker if the victims had been white females. While police desperately searched for the killer, they kept a close eye on women in the community at risk. Despite their efforts, on October 15, 2004, Brenda Irving's body was found in a ditch near Farmington. Brenda was found nude, and an autopsy determined that she had been strangled and suffered blunt force trauma to her head. She also had fatal levels of cocaine in her system at the time of her death. Her children had feared for their mother's safety, as she had known many of the women who had been killed or disappeared from central Illinois. Brenda struggled with drug addiction. Despite detectives' best efforts, the case proved difficult to solve. They followed thousands of leads, but finally got the lead they were waiting for in December of 2004. 35-year-old Vicki Boehmer was arrested for theft. From jail, she told authorities that she thought she could help them find the serial killer preying on her fellow sex workers. She believed that a man who had picked her up in July 2004 was responsible. Boehmer explained that in July, a man named Larry Bright lured her to his mother's home where they shared alcohol and drugs. Once she was intoxicated, she said Bright attacked her, attempted to rape her, and pulled a knife on her. Somehow, Boehmer was able to escape. Police were at first skeptical, as Boehmer asked for a plea deal in exchange for her testimony. Why hadn't she reported this back in July? Why wait until she was under arrest? Vicki Boehmer claimed she was scared of being arrested for outstanding warrants, which is why she did not come forward in July 2004. A search of her criminal history confirmed the warrants, so detectives decided to take a look at the man named Larry Bright. Larry Dean Bright was born in Peoria, Illinois, on July 8, 1966. He served a 2-year stint in prison at age 19 for burglary and carjacking. According to Larry's family, the time Larry spent in prison changed him for the worse. Larry became more angry and violent and began using drugs. Larry had an injury, which started an addiction to prescription opioids and later crack cocaine. He also developed an addiction to pornography, preferring videos with black women. Larry lived with his mother in a tiny guest house behind her home. Larry enjoyed gardening, creating a beautiful garden bed of flowers for his mother. When the police arrived at Larry's home following the tip, they noticed the beautiful flowers in the garden. Larry was placed under arrest for the unlawful restraint of Vicki. They questioned Larry about the murders, but he denied having any information about the murdered and missing women. Throughout the interview, Larry smoked several cigarettes. Detectives planned to take one of the cigarette butts and test it for DNA, but Larry ate them before leaving the interrogation room. Larry declined to give DNA voluntarily. Police searched Larry Bright's home on January 20, 2005. The investigators dug up the garden, finding several small bone fragments and ashes that were later determined to be human. When the police questioned Larry again, they told him they were digging up his mother's flowers. At this point, Larry broke down and confessed to multiple murders. He even led investigators to the remains of some of his victims. Larry explained that around July 27, 2003, he picked up Sabrina Payne on the south side of Peoria. He drove her to his home, which he shared with his mother. He claimed the two drank and used cocaine before having consensual sex. Larry said he did not intend to kill Sabrina, but he became enraged, thinking Sabrina was trying to rip him off. He strangled her to death and dumped her body near the cornfield where she was found. Larry confessed to picking up Barbara Williams in February 2004. Again, he used drugs and alcohol with his victim. He stated that he once again lost control of his anger and killed Barbara. He claimed he caught Barbara stealing from him. He dumped her body along the road, where she was found the next day. The prosecution believed that after the first two murders, Larry developed a bloodlust. At the time of his arrest, he said, "I knew them I would kill the others I would pick up. I went out hunting." Larry also confessed to killing Laura Lauer. He burned her body in his backyard burn pit, burying their remains in his mother's yard. He said he wanted to destroy the bodies to avoid getting caught. He confessed to killing Tamara Walls and burning her remains. Her jawbone was found in the backyard. He admitted to strangling, beating, and burning Shirley and Trapp. Shakanda Thomas had the same fate after being picked up by Larry Bright. He burned the woman and buried the ashes in the yard. Because of his attempts to cremate his victims, he was nicknamed the Bone Crusher. Larry said that he attempted to burn Linda Neal and Brenna Irving as well, but the attempts were unsuccessful due to the weather. He dumped both women along the side of the road. Larry was facing the death penalty following his January 2005 arrest. In an attempt to spare his mother the embarrassment of a trial and avoid the death penalty, Larry Bright pleaded guilty to 7 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of drug-induced homicide on May 30, 2006. Bright's murders were not considered racially motivated, but detectives believe he was just attracted to black women. He is one of the very few serial killers who chooses victims outside of his race. Larry was sentenced to 7 life sentences without the possibility of parole, to be served concurrently. He was also given an additional 30 years for the drug-induced homicide. As part of the plea deal, Larry will be required to serve 100% of his sentence with no parole consideration. Larry is currently housed at the Shawnee Correctional Center in Vienna, Illinois. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars, but that brings little peace to the families of his victims. The loved ones of Larry's victims want people to know that the women he killed were more than just drug addicts or prostitutes. They were people. They were mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends. The serial killer dentist of St. Louis, Clennon Engelman. Dr. Clennon Engelman was born on February 6, 1927, in St. Louis, Missouri. Dr. Engelman grew up on the south side of the city and felt a deep connection to his neighborhood. After serving in the military, Dr. Engelman used his GI Bill to go to Washington University and become a dentist. He opened his dental office on the south side of St. Louis, serving the community he had always loved. Dr. Engelman, who went by Clen, was married to a woman named Edna Ruth, but they divorced in 1956. By 1958, both Clen and Ruth had remarried. Clen was operating his dental office and appeared to be successfully serving the St. Louis community. On December 17, 1958, citizens in Forest Park noticed a bloodied man stumbling. The man, James Stanley Bullock, soon passed from his injuries. These injuries were caused by a gunshot. No one could figure out why someone would shoot 28-year-old James Bullock. James Bullock was born on April 17, 1931, in DeSoto. He was raised in Shiloh, Illinois, by his grandparents and later his aunt after his parents passed away. According to an article from 1938, the then 7-year-old was living with his grandparents in 1938 and enjoyed attending school and fishing. James later served in the military before returning to St. Louis to work and go to college. Back in St. Louis, James met Edna Ruth, the ex-wife of Dr. Clen Engelman. The two married, and 6 short months later, James was dead. An employee at a local sanitarium initially claimed James was there 4 days before his murder, asking to be admitted because he feared for his life. His wife and aunt said this was not true, as the 3 had dinner together on that night. According to his widow and aunt, James was not afraid for his life, and they knew no one who would want him dead. However, Edna Ruth benefited greatly from her husband's death. Ruth had life insurance policies totaling $64,088. While under questioning, Edna Ruth made several weird statements, including telling the police she was married before, but her husband did not know. Who was she married to? Her husband's dentist, Dr. Clen Engelman. Edna Ruth had lied to James and his family and lied on the marriage application about being married before. Police questioned a local career criminal who was out on parole for an assault at the time of the shooting. They weren't able to tie him to the murder of James, but they did note he lived near Dr. Engelman's office. Dr. Engelman and Edna Ruth both refused to take a polygraph test and denied any involvement in the murder of James Bullock. Dr. Engelman's new wife, Ida, refused to be questioned by the police. A patient provided an alibi for Dr. Engelman. However, another witness said that they tried to find someone at the office around the time and the office was empty. Edna Ruth invested part of the funds she received after becoming a widow into doctor. Been bored being a dentist, so he often ventured into other areas of business. This included buying a trike strip along with a partner, Eric Fry. Dr. Engelman had grown to be close friends with Eric and his wife Sandy. On September 26, 1963, Eric and Dr. Engelman were at the drag strip using dynamite to explode and then fill abandoned cisterns on the property. Eric was lying on his stomach near one of the cisterns when the dynamite exploded quicker than anticipated. Eric was killed instantly and found lying in the bottom of the cistern. Coroner H.D. Steinbeck ruled the death accidental. Mr. Frey's wife had an insurance policy on her husband, which she invested part of into Dr. Engelman's practice. Dr. Engelman divorced Ida and married his third wife, Ruth, in 1967. The couple shared a son, but Ruth hated the close relationship her husband had with a young woman who worked in his office named Carmen Miranda. Dr. Engelman offered to train Carmen to be a dental assistant in his office. Edna felt uncomfortable with the flirting between the doctor and his young assistant. Dr. Engelman, however, claimed he was trying to help people in his community. He hired Carmen's brother, Nick, as well at one point. Ruth was relieved when Carmen met a married man named Peter Holm. Just a few months later, however, Carmen and Eric were walking in a rural area in Pacific, Missouri. The couple were exploring an area known to have caves and scenic paths. A shot suddenly fired, hitting Peter in the head. Peter died instantly, and a hysterically Carmen flagged down the help. Nearby, police found an X on a tree made with tape. The area was familiar to locals as a hunting area, and police believed that the shot was accidental. Police believe someone was target shooting at the X and accidentally struck Mr. Holm. Carmen had a significant amount of life insurance on her husband, totaling $60,000. This is equivalent to around $300,000 in 2024. Dr. Engelman and Ruth divorced soon after, at which time Dr. Engelman married young Carmen, whom he had known since she was a small child. His son lived with Edna, his ex-wife. Despite being married to Carmen, Dr. Engelman and Ruth still met regularly for sex. Dr. Engelman constantly had extramarital affairs, which included previous affairs with Carmen, Ruth, and even Sandy Fry, the wife of his business associate Eric Fry, who was killed by dynamite. Another of Dr. Engelman's affairs was with a patient named Barbara Boyle. On November 3, 1977, someone pretending to be from the farm girl walked up to the farmhouse owned by Arthur and Vernita Guswell in Everettsville, Illinois. Soon after entering the home, the elderly couple were attacked and both were shot in the head. The wealthy couple left $340,000 to their son, Ronald Guswell. Guess who Ronald Guswell was married to? Barbara Boyle. On April 4, 1979, less than 2 years after the murder of his parents, Ronald Guswell was found dead inside his car outside a hotel in East St. Louis, Illinois. The man had been beaten and shot to death. He had been missing for 4 days when his body was found. Following her husband's murder, Barbara collected his inheritance in addition to several life insurance policies. The equivalent sum of money today would be nearly $1.7 million. Guess who she cut to? Dr. Glennon Engelman. Following the murder of Ronald Guswell, authorities were starting to notice the trend of connected deaths to Dr. Engelman. His patients and community, however, only saw a generous man committed to helping his community and its citizens. Dr. Engelman was not the greatest dentist, however. He often did a sloppy job of making casts for dentures and dental appliances, requiring the work to have to be redone by the dental lab several times. His business was struggling, however, and he soon found himself in debt with the dental lab owned by Sophie Barrera. Sophie Barrera owned a South St. Louis dental laboratory and had grown tired of waiting for Dr. Engelman to pay up by 1980. She filed a lawsuit against the doctor that was set to go to court just a few days after Sophie was murdered. On January 14, 1980, Sophie entered her vehicle in South St. Louis. Shortly after, the vehicle exploded. Police found remnants of a bomb under her charred vehicle. Sophie had told her son before she was in fear of being killed. She believed Dr. Glenn Engelman was dangerous. Dr. Engelman was questioned for 3 hours and then released. Police were certain he was responsible for Sophie's death, but they had to prove it. The public also wondered if the bombing was related to another bombing in the area that was carried out between two mob families fighting for control over St. Louis's labor unions. The evidence indicated, however, that this was not a mob hit. The number one suspect was the man who owed Sophie $15,000. Dr. Engelman had to be stopped, but the police weren't sure how to do it. Detectives soon began having conversations with Dr. Engelman's ex-wife and mother of his son, Ruth. Ruth told police nothing at first, but eventually started to talk. She explained that Dr. Engelman often bragged about killing people. He told her that he had a superpower. He was able to kill without remorse. He had admitted to killing Eric Fry, Peter Holm, and the Guswell family. It was his side hustle, killing for profit. Ruth agreed to help the police, but none of her testimony could be used in court because Dr. Engelman confessed to her while the two were still married. he was protected by spousal privilege. Ruth decided to wear a wire, however, and met up with Dr. Engelman to exchange their son and sometimes just to socialize. They were still having a sexual relationship despite Dr. Engelman's marriage to Carmen. She tried to get Dr. Engelman to confess to her again by asking direct questions. He didn't seem to take the bait at first, and Ruth feared he would kill her next. Ruth suggested police plant a bug in her bedroom and she would invite the dentist over for sex. Dr. Engelman was suspicious, however, and did not say anything that could lead to his arrest. Ruth then met him at a diner wearing a wire, and this time he commented on being homicidally intimate with the widow of one of his victims. He admitted to the murders in great detail, providing just what police needed for an arrest. He explained that he found murder more sexually satisfying than sex. His ex-wife was given a new life in the witness protection program. Carmen, who was no longer married to the dentist, and her brother Nick were brought in for questioning to corroborate the allegations against Dr. Engelman. As possible co-conspirators, they asked for and were granted immunity to testify against the dentist. Carmen told quite the story. She said she was working for the dentist when he suggested she find someone with good benefits to marry. He told her about Eric Fry, whom he said he directed Sandy Fry to marry with all intentions of murdering the insurance proceeds. Soon after she was married, Carmen said Dr. Engelman told her where to go and made sure her husband was shot and killed. He staged it to look like a target shooting accident. Clement Engelman was finally arrested and charged with murder in 1980. Carmen testified at Dr. Engelman's first trial, for which he was convicted of murdering Peter Hom and given 50 years in prison. The dentist then pled guilty to the murder of Sophie Barrera to avoid the death penalty. Serving a life sentence for that murder in Missouri, Dr. Engelman was back in clerk by 1985 in Illinois. In 1984, Robert Handy, a contact and acquaintance of Dr. Engelman, admitted to authorities that he had taken part in the murder conspiracy of the Goosewell family. He implicated Dr. Engelman, who had bludgeoned Ronald Goosewell and shot him, as well as Ronald's widow, Barbara Boyle. Dr. Engelman was given 3 life sentences for the Goosewell murders. He also was convicted of federal mail fraud and given a 30-year federal sentence. He is believed to have killed at least 12 people, including conspiring with his first wife to kill her husband, James Bullock, in 1958. Edna Ruth was never charged in the case due to lack of evidence. Barbara Boyle went on trial for the murder of her in-laws, Arthur and Vernita Goosewell, and husband Ronald in 1985. The jury acquitted her of the murders of Arthur and Vernita but convicted her of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Ronald Goosewell. Barbara Boyle was sentenced to 50 years in prison in 1985. She was granted parole in 2009. Dr. Engelman enjoyed his notoriety in Missouri, often comparing himself to legendary outlaw Jesse James. He is believed to have killed at least 12 people, but the actual number is unknown. Unlike other serial killers, Dr. Engelman was inspired, at least in part, by greed. He also seemed to revel in his ability to not feel remorse. Dr. Engelman died of diabetes-related health issues in 1999 at age 72. He was incarcerated in Jefferson City at the time.